Hi everybody, welcome to Event Space. Thanks for coming. I would ask that you take your cell phone and put it over to vibrate mode or turn it off or just kind of get rid of it, because you're not going to want it to be buzzing while you're in the middle of this. You're going to enjoy it. For those of you that are watching at home, this is a good time to put your answering machine on if you still have it. Sit back with a big cup of coffee and watch this presentation. It could change everything about your photography. That's kind of my goal. My name is David Brommer and I have the pleasure of running the Event Space. The Event Space is really a wonderful institution that we have here at B&H. It's not all about sales. It's not all about pushing things on you. You're never going to get sold a co-op or a timeshare. This is about giving you inspiration for photography or teaching you how to make better photography. So this one goes into a sort of an inspirational range. It's called Finding Photographic Style. And I'm really thrilled to give this one to you guys. For those of you that are here, you have a little worksheet in your hands. You'll notice there's some links, and on some of the links there's a space bar that's underneath it. That space bar, you're free to write when you go to this person's work, when you see it shown on the screen, you're free to put a one-word thought if you could sum up their work in one word. It's kind of difficult for some people, but if it's one word, feel free to jot down that one word, and then you can review that later. Also, on the bottom of that sheet, you'll see there's a time slot for late December. I think it's the 29th. And there's a critique session that goes along with this presentation. You can only come to the critique session if you've come to one of the Finding Photographic Style sessions. So feel free to clear that day. I think it's also, as I was coming up with the date, I liked it. It was December 29th, right before the new year. And I think this exercise I'm going to give you is a great way to finish off the year. So I think you're going to enjoy that. So going forward on this, what exactly is Finding Photographic Style? What is photographic style in general? So we like to say in the visual arts, style, it represents aspects of the visual appearance of the work. It usually comes down to the same artist, the same period, the same training, a school, or a movement. That's the typical definition of what style is. But as it applies to us photographers, I want to do an exercise and say that if we took 5 photographs from everybody in this room, and we were familiar with your work. I was your friend. I had seen your work before. I understood your work a little bit about you, and we put all this work up on the wall. Could I go and could I say, this one, this one, this one, and this one is actually Jane's work. That's her photographs. I'm familiar with it. Because there's a style that pervades through all 5 of these images so that you can see which one it is. That, I think, is one of the greatest things in photography, and I want to see a show of hands here. Who can say that their photography has been following a path, and the images almost look like they're in a, let's say, a novel where you can tell it's the same writer, the same style. Does that happen to anyone here? Is anyone kind of on the path to style? Okay. All right, we want to continue with this, and we're going to really try to figure out, we're going to digest, we're going to subjugate ourselves to style, and we're going to figure out exactly what it takes to do this. So first thing I want to show is that this is an image from a particular photographer, and I say particular because he's very particular, and this photographer, for me, has been an influence, so much of an influence that I actually was scared of looking at his work. This is a little-known piece of this gentleman. Can anyone tell me what this, who the artist is, who the photographer is? Okay, what's that?
Diane Arbus.
Diane Arbus. She, great Diane Arbus. Great. It's not Diane Arbus, but definitely the two of them are in the same vein. And if I may say, have one word to describe them, it would be weird. But it's Joel Peter Witkin. Now, Joel Peter Witkin is one of the best photographers that's not incredibly well known, at least not outside of the art circle. Joel Peter Witkin is a photographer that is so famous, so important, he really doesn't have his own website. You just Google him, and he lets the museums of collections that he's in be his website. Which, by the way, in terms of not having your own website and letting MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Modern, letting these museums take care of you on your web presence, you've reached. You're in the ascension. His work is very particular. He's a Brooklyn-born artist. Now he's living in the, I believe, the West Coast. He split some time, I think, in Santa Fe as well. And what he would do is his body of work, he went to San Francisco, and he went to Mexico, and he would work with cadavers, and he would arrange the cadavers. He would photograph them on a large format camera, and then he would take the negatives, and he would intentionally damage the negatives or scratch them and then print them. He works in platinum palladium quite frequently. He does have some color work that's up there. I threw Joel Peter Witkin at you guys first. Now, you know, it's early in the morning. It's before noon, and I'm showing you Joel Peter Witkin work. Like, one of his biggest images is called The Kiss, and the kiss is a head split in half, a cadaver's head split in half, kissing. He arranged this. This is hardcore stuff, okay? So I'm sorry to wake you all up with this, but in terms of a sense of style, taking bones and doing creations, this is all very particular work, very lyrical and mythological work, an angel with its wings turned off. So some of this work is really quite out there. But Joel Peter Witkin, once you see it, from now on, you'll always be able to tell either he's being imitated or it's one of his pieces. In terms of imitation, for those of you that are familiar with it, there's a breakout band called 9 Inch Nails. 9 Inch Nails did one of their first videos. They were very Witkin inspired. When you watch this music video, you think to yourself, Witkin, which is pretty cool because now the art has done a crossover from music to photography. Pretty impressive stuff. So the thing about style is, let's ask ourselves a couple of questions. Do you have it? How do we cultivate it? And how do we get known for it? That's kind of what we want to do when it comes terms to style, so that we can look at that wall and pick out those pictures from everyone who submitted within the room. So where does our style originate? I'm going to do this section. I'm going to speak a little bit about myself, because being able to come up with a whole piece and a whole presentation on style, and I want to extrapolate this into a book. We sell this book here. It's Composition from Snapshots to Great Shots. I was a guest author in this, and it was from someone who came to this presentation and suggested it to the editors. So the next step is to work on something with style. And trying to digest it, I had to look into myself and figure it out. So who's my primary influence? The indomitable and incredible Richard Avedon. Richard Avedon is an incredible photographer who passed away a couple of years ago, who is known for taking fashion and making it fine art. There was a couple of other guys in that camp that did that as well, Irving Penn, but Richard Avedon really nailed it. Very strong sense of style. This period of work that he was doing, he was working with 8x10 cameras and going cross country and photographing with a white seamless background. And I really liked it because it just gives all the attention right to the subject. It doesn't let any disillusionment happen. You're not biased by environments or anything like that. You're not looking at the pretty White House lawn that George Bush is standing in front of. You're not looking at a dark coal mine that the worker's in front of. And can anyone tell me who this guy is? Lee Friedlander, another famous photographer. So Richard Avedon's able to give you a lot of clues about the subject based upon the photograph. I do love the bush shot. I love the coal worker shot. The strategic cropping of the head we're going to see later on from another guy who was influenced by Avedon. And then this is the Chicago 7. I liked it a lot. It really affected me. I've been shooting weddings and playing around in the tri-state area, the 80s and early 90s, but then I moved to Seattle, and in Seattle I started really getting into photography and deciding that I really had a vision. So just going back and forth here, a little bit of my history. I ran a gallery in Seattle called Suspect Photography, and nothing beats learning photography than looking at other people's photography. So curating work, doing these shows, I learned a lot about photography because I really was a young punk, 25 years old, had no idea what I was doing running a gallery, but I had a great space and a great location. I worked in a camera store, and that's me in the front. I had a little bit more hair back then. Working in camera stores, I get to meet a lot of photographers, so that's another way, you know, again, meeting a lot of people, looking at a lot of work, you get this style. The guy behind me, his name is Mark Palmer. Mark Palmer was an Englishman, and I don't know if you guys know any Englishmen, but when an Englishman says something, it's immediately true and a fact. So Mark would say, well, you have to use a Leica camera because the Leica lenses are superior to everyone else's lenses. So he kind of had to play with that. I went the Zeiss route, I didn't go the Leica route, but I like my German glass. And Mark was pretty cool. So when I was working there, I tried to work with the best possible equipment I could get my hands on, which was Contax equipment. Unfortunately, Contax lost in the digital autofocus battle and they went away, but they did use Carl Zeiss lenses. I work at a Hasselblad as well, which uses Zeiss lenses. And now Zeiss Lenses is making lenses for Canon and Nikon. They're manual focused lenses, but they're beautiful lenses. Check them out. Good stuff. I worked with Kodak Tecpan film. Mark Palmer said, Tecpan film has the finest grain of all. No, so it must have been correct. But I wasn't into large format at that time, so I worked with the best possible 35 millimeter, and I combined that with the best possible lenses that were out at the time. And then I used a Rodinal developer because Mark Palmer explained to me this effect called the adjacency effect, and this formula. Use really good lenses, use really good film, such as Kodak Tecpan, 25 ASA, black and white film, do it in Rodinol, and you get something called the adjacency effect. What the actual formula was a 1:100 dilution of Rodinol with minimum agitation working with Kodak TechPan. Who here is into Photoshop and digital imaging? Okay. This is an analog treatment, but when you work in digital photography, you've also got to come up with using Lightroom the exact same way, or using Nik Silver Efex Pro. This is all the same thing. This is just workflow. Darkroom versus sitting in front of the computer, the end result, you're creating images. It's the same thing. I do like the smell of chemistry though. Okay, so what did the adjacency effect look like? It gave me super high contrast, which I like for my white backgrounds. It also, where black lines meet the white background, it really would pop and jump and get extra contrasty. And I enjoyed this look a lot. I started working with this adjacency effect TechPan, and I was in love. And I was like, you know what, I'm only gonna shoot this film this way in the studio. And because I was in Seattle and it was the 90s, I was dialed into the freaks of the scenes. So, you know, I'm working with two girls that have mohawks, both have pierced tongues. What are we gonna do? We're gonna chain them together. It just kind of made sense to do something like that. So the genre started to also show itself. I photographed a lot of the people in the clubs, the poets, the artists, the musicians of Seattle. And I was able to come up with a project called the Seattle Suspects. And I have a link to it on the site. But this is exclusively how I shot for this period of time. It was black and white, high contrast. I like to do the full length shooting to really grab images of them. Each person has a lot of personality. I wanted that to show. I wanted to put it on that white background the way Richard Avedon did, because I felt it gave an emotionally neutral context to look at the subject in, so that you can really work with them. I would encourage props, taking time with the people and really learning them. And this project was an honor to do. I started photographing a few drag queens. There was a big drag queen movement in the mid-90s. You guys remember Wigstock and all that in the 90s. So I started shooting drag queens. They loved me. I got an idea that I'm gonna shoot a drag queen out of drag and in drag. Unfortunately, that put a drag queen in my studio for about 2.5 to 3 hours. So that experiment drag queens were crazy. You ever spent a lot of time with them, they're a little wacky. The culmination project out of this whole thing was the Seattle Suspects. And what I did was I really advanced on it. This was a flyer that I used and put around to get people to come to the studio and shoot. But I tried to also, I want to inform viewers really in a three-dimensional sense. So I had them fill out a survey form, and it was, what is your current occupation? What are you most satisfied with in the universe? What are you most unsatisfied with in the universe? And what is your ultimate goal? Everyone had to fill out that little sheet. And by the way, you can see some text underneath it. This is stapled together. Underneath this is the model release. I want to do this right, be a nice clean photographer, get the model release so I could do anything with the images and publish them in a book. And it worked out really fun. So it also let the project age really well. Later on, I was able to look at the project and see this attitude that was in the 90s. I've been asking these questions now. Still, I do photography and I ask these questions, and I've noticed that they've changed. So it really informs you very well. So this is taking a little bit of word, writing, also the photography. It all comes into play. I shot 122 suspects. 36 made the final cut in the book. And I'm very happy to say that these are up in a show right now at ZGM Gallery in Buffalo. So if you want to shuffle off to Buffalo, it'll be up for about another week. The website has the book you can get, limited edition set prints. And take a quick look at this page of the website, because we're going to be going back to this theory later on. Notice how the website sort of looks like the Seattle Suspects project. You know, my palette is basically black and white, so that kind of comes through. And we're going to talk about presentation in a little bit. Okay. It was a blast doing this, and it was also a process that was definitely, this was a chemical process. I was in the darkroom working this out, printing it. I did do all scans of everything so I could put them on the website and do some digital prints. For me personally, I enjoy this moment. Have you guys worked in a black and white darkroom? Who's done black and white printing? It's romantic, isn't it? You're in the dark, the latent image slowly comes up. Who here works with an Epson printer? Would you say, zzz, 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 zzz. Is that romantic? No, it's not. Something about the feel and texture of the darkroom. The ends justifies the means, though. It doesn't matter which direction you go in, believe in the direction you go in and move forward on it. I think that's pretty important. Okay, so I moved to New York City with this great body of black and white work from mid-90s Seattle. Everything's wonderful, and I'm rolling around to galleries, and I'm rolling around to, remember Details magazine I used to love a lot, and these art directors would look at the work and they would say, this is great, where's your color book? And I'd say, I don't have color, I'm a photographic artist. I work in black and white. The adjacency effect, Mark Palmer told me. And then the art director would close the book and I would never hear from them again. They wouldn't answer my calls. So I ran out of money, went to work at a camera store, and I came to B&H, and that's kind of how I rolled into it. But I took that time when I reevaluated everything, I started shooting in color. And I had to embrace digital photography because I wanted to do prints with with color work on the new Epson printers that were coming out. And I started to figure of doing color, I got to kind of get this David LaChapelle heavy duty saturated color thing going on. Plus I had an influence that I'd forgotten about who kind of comes out. So we've got purple gels, red gels, we've got a little bit of lyrical stuff going on, but you can see how this really looks like color versions of that black and white work, right? It's kind of a logical progression the way that happens. I want to work with the backgrounds, but instead of just white, I'm going to take a colored background and light them with gels. So I think this is an important part of photography, is that first off, to figure out your style, we have to clearly understand what is our intention. So it's like, what do you seek to achieve by creating this work? So let's just run down a little deconstructed list of some of the intentions out there. Informing the public about a cause or situation. Has anyone went down and photographed the Occupy Wall Street movement? Okay, for those of you that say yes, good job. It's very historical. It could become very important. It could be a powder keg. I don't think it's going to fizzle. Good job. You're in New York. The whole thing centered on Zuccotti Park. Wall Street's in New York, not in Berkeley. So very good job of covering. I think that's wonderful. What are you going to do with that work? Were you able to put your own style, suffuse it with that work that you shot? For those of you that haven't gone down to Occupy Wall Street, and I'm going to put myself in this one, we should go down with our cameras and we should shoot a little bit and try to take a look at that. So informing the public about a cause or situation, that's a very easy one to do. It could be homeless, which is a simple one. It could be AIDS work. It could be the AIDS workers that actually help AIDS patients. Very common theme of the late 80s and the 90s. I know people who are, I know a friend who likes to volunteer all her time at pet shelters. Now she's bringing her camera and shooting the pets, and she's getting a lot better at it. Creating an aesthetically pleasing body of work. This is simply that you like your photography, and what you want to do is you just want to create something, a body of work. My partner in Seattle, her name was Susan Seacott. Susan was famous for shooting her daughter. Her body of work surrounded her daughter, and she started doing it because she wanted to document her kid. Makes total sense. Very similar to the way photographer Sally Mann photographs her family. Again, this is creating it started off, she wanted to shoot her family a certain way, and all of a sudden she's become a highly collected and great photographer. This is a little bit on the vain side, but you want attention, you want your work to be seen. Who here is a big fan of Flickr, the online photo web sharing site? Okay, you guys may fall into this one. For those of you that have a Facebook where you put a lot of pictures, when people make comments on your pictures, do you kind of like it? It's fun. It feels good. You know, you want attention. It's great. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pictures on Flickr. Maybe there's millions of pictures on Flickr. But somebody took the time to comment and say, great fall shot, great whatever. I mean, that's good. Okay, you're a pro. You're looking to earn your name. How do you earn your spurs? A real pro has to really know what he's doing and have a very definable style, and then people will seek them out when they want that look. That is what every pro really wants. You guys are familiar with the term jack of all trades, master of nothing? It's a very dangerous thing to fall into. If you're shooting portraits, you're shooting bat mitzvahs, you're trying to do fashion work, you're trying to do runway work, you're trying to do fine arts from your work at Mystic Seaport and the boats that are on the water. You start to do a whole bunch of stuff and it gets very diluted. So pros, though, when they want to be known for something, they tend to specialize. Creativity is inside you. You are an artist. I did put on this sheet, the cheat sheet, and for those of you that came in late and didn't grab one, we got cheat sheets on the back for you. I have a reading list, and I want you to take a look at that reading list. I recommend going to the Strand on Broadway. They have very inexpensive books. A lot of this work you can find in paperback, and you can get it online really cheap if you do ebooks. Art and Fear by David Boyle and Ted Orland. Even though it's not about photography, if you want to do this, read it. It's important. It's good stuff. Why People Photograph, Robert Adams. Letting Go of the Camera by Brooks Jensen. Brooks Jensen's the editor of Lens Work. It's a Northwest publication. Highly recommended. He's a great editorialist and he writes wonderful things. And of course, Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes, which is really important. So being an artist, it's inside you and you need to get it out. I live with an artist, even though she does business management for for a financial firm, a Stockholm-based financial firm that's on, that's it here in Midtown. It's a software financial firm. She's still an artist, and it comes out with her. It has to come out. Otherwise, if she's not creating, she's not in a good mood. And since I live with her and she's my wife, I like her to be in a good mood. Okay. Hurdles. You know, I just want to go back for a quick second here. On that paper that I gave you, that note paper, I would ask you, whoops. I would ask you to write down what your intention is. What do you want to achieve on that? So on that paper, just in one word, what your intention is, if it's one of those 5. Okay, hurdles. This part of the talk gets a little motivational, and we've got hurdles in front of us that keep us from really experiencing what we are. And it's unfortunate the way that hurdles come out, but we got to jump a hurdle. When you jump a hurdle, you become stronger, so it's important to look at it. So first thing I want to talk to you guys about is too much gear. Now you may say, wait a minute, the B&H guy just said too much gear is a hurdle. Doesn't he want his job? Well, I do want my job, but I believe buy the right gear, which will lead you to continuously expanding your photographic spending at B&H. But too much gear can be a problem, because when you leave the house, you take your fisheye lens, because David said a fisheye is cool, so you got a fisheye lens. You take your 24 to 72.8, which is your general bread and butter lens. It's going to do the most work for you. But you also spend $2,500 on a 70 to 200 2.8, so you have to put that into the camera bag. And while you're at it, the 85 1.2 lens is a spectacular lens, and you have to bring that with you. And you got to take a flash. You got to take the flash cord, so you can take the flash off the hot shoe. Maybe you work with multiple flashes. You got to take another flash. You're probably going to need a sink. You're going to need a tripod. And you're also going to need a truck to lug all this gear with. So what's going to happen is you're not going to photograph as much because you've got too much gear. Also, because you're working with all those different focal lengths, your pictures are wide angle, they're telephoto, they're macro, they're all over the place. It looks like 3 or 4 different photographers were grabbing from your camera bag using the same camera and your lenses and took the same pictures. So it becomes kind of a hassle when you have too much gear. The part about too much gear that scares me the most is, let's say that you're in Cortona, a medieval hilltop city in Italy, in Tuscany. And up on top of Cortona is this beautiful basilica, and above that is the fort. You're on the bottom of Cortona, and you just had a beautiful pizza. You're going to walk up the winding alleyways. If you've got a camera bag with all that gear, you better hire a Sherpa, because it's going to be rough. So what's going to happen is that you're going to get right to the top of the town before it starts to thin out. You're going to be sitting in a palazzo. You're going to sit down because your back hurts from carrying all that glass, and you're not going to go all the way to the top, and you're not going to get that picture. Sometimes too much gear will keep you from going to the next block. So I walk to the Lower East Side, I walk through Chinatown, I'm tuckered out, I get in a cab and I come home. Instead of continuing down, all the way down, maybe Grand Street, or finding some interesting places, but I had all this equipment. So you need to liberate yourself with the gear. Maybe just walk around with one wide angle lens, one camera, and maybe a small bag and a couple of memory cards, and that's it. You know, so go home and look at your arsenal of equipment and think about your vision and where you want to go with it. Don't carry too much. It's much more refreshing to carry lightweight equipment. You're smiling, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you get heavy. Okay, too little gear. Too little gear is the opposite of this, because you have a vision, but you don't have the right gear to actually achieve that vision. For me, I was a studio photographer and I had to work with more lights. You see that white background that I had in those pictures? That white background really took a minimum of 2 studio strobes just to light the background, but I had to light the subject. The subject I wanted to light with a big beauty dish, and I wanted to mount that beauty dish on a large, not a crane, but a boom arm, a Bogan super boom, and I also needed a strip light. I needed another light in a strip box off to the side. That was my formula. That's what I ended up with. When I started shooting the 2 girls that were chained together with the tongue piercing, what I lit them with was one Vivitar 283 with a slave, and then another 285 and an umbrella on a light stand in front of them. I thought that image wasn't good. I knew I was onto something, but the image, technically, I didn't have enough equipment to pull it off. Now, I showed you the digital one where I did a lot of dodging and burning on the background to make it look white. Trust me, the negative has got a lot of gray in it because I only had one crummy light in the background. So I learned, kept evolving with it. Too little gear, sometimes your images just don't, you know what you want, you're getting there, but it's just not happening. Maybe you're doing things that the subjects are very far away, you need to isolate them. You need that longer lens, so don't worry about the wider or the standard lenses. Concentrate on that. Maybe you're doing abstract photography and you can't get close enough to that reflections on the dewdrop that's on the leaf. then you need a better macro lens. Maybe you need extension tubes. So very carefully analyze the equipment that you need to accomplish your goal. Okay, too little time. This is a big one. Too little time. Who here is a full professional photographer? No one's raising their hand. Who here is retired? I envy you. Okay, if you're retired, that's wonderful. Then you have enough time that you should be able to do your photography. No problem. Okay. No, you're not managing your time right. But let me tell you, you got to prioritize. Now, I do about 46 hours a week here at B&H. It's tough. But when we do our breaks, when we do our Passover and our Sukkot breaks, I've learned, I've been here 14 years, I self-assign myself projects and I make sure that I'm working. You got to manage that time properly. Okay, distractions are a big one. And distractions are something where you're thinking about something else comes into play, and all of a sudden you've lost your train of thought. So case in point, when I was building this very presentation, working on this slide, I do a lot of good work at around 6:30 in the morning. So I'm up in the morning, I'm working on the presentation. It's all good, I'm halfway done. Late at night, I'm working on the presentation, and my wife comes out and she says, hey, do you know where the flashlight is? I need the flashlight. So I'm like working on this, trying to come up with these hurdles, and I'm like, it's in the other room. She goes into the other room, in the storage room. She comes back out, she goes, where is it? Now I gotta get up away from the computer, I gotta find that flashlight. Okay, fine, it's a distraction. I know it, I'm sounding like in The Shining when Jack Nicholson is typing his novel, but I get her the flashlight, I go back, I start writing, and I'm on it. I'm like, distractions, and I'm thinking about it, and all of a sudden she comes and she goes, hey, batteries are dead. Where's the battery? So it was a constant thing. Music, TV, things like that, those are your distractions. Be careful of them. So the retirees who think that, hey, what do you mean I don't have enough time? You got to focus on the work. Get rid of those distractions. Super important. Okay, this is a big one, the digital learning curve. And I think you guys are all going to understand about this one. So the digital learning curve works like this. I get a brand new camera from B&H Photo. It's a beautiful camera. I load the pictures, I shoot RAW because I know that RAW files give me the best latitude and that's the best stuff to do. So I go out and I shoot, and then I come home and I plug it into my computer, and the RAW file isn't recognized by my CS4 because it's a new camera. So my Adobe CS4 Photoshop doesn't read it. So I've got to upgrade my software. Okay, so you upgrade your software. You say, it's a really good thing is this new software called Lightroom. And I'm going to work with Lightroom. I'm going to pass on Photoshop. I'm going to use Lightroom. So now you've got all this work and you open up Lightroom and it's really confusing. It's got tabs, all sorts of menus, everything's going on. You kind of remember playing with elements. You liked your iPhoto. So now before you can concentrate on your photography, you got to figure out Lightroom. So you know what I'm talking about this one. Okay, also your camera is difficult to understand because there's a small sensor or there's a big sensor, and then I bought this lens and it's an 18-55 and it should be super wide, but when I put it on this camera, it doesn't look so wide. There's all this digital learning that we have to figure out. Now, not that film photography was so easy. I think that was really just as hard in its own way, but digital photography, there's a lot going on. Who here wants to print their photographs? Okay, who here's colors, what they see on the screen, highlights, shadows, colors, that's what comes out of their printer. Raise your hands. Okay, far less people. That is really annoying, okay? But you've got to figure that out if you want to make a portfolio to bring to a portfolio review and you want to show in a gallery and you want to do this type of work. It's really a hassle to do that. So digital learning curve, we have to stop and we have to figure it out. Now what's interesting about the digital learning curve is that it's constantly changing and evolving, and you really have to keep up with it. The thing that I found about film photography and working in the darkroom, you only got better. It didn't change. You could still work with an enlarger from 40 years ago, and if you knew how to plug it in and how to set up the timer, you were in. But if you go to load RAW files from a brand new camera in software that's 4 years old, you may stop dead in your tracks. And it's happened to me, and I'm the B&H event space guy. So I sit there with RAW files, and I'm like, I can't even open this. So then I download, I was testing a new Olympus camera. I'll tell you the story real fast. New Olympus camera, and I took these great shots, and I only shot RAW. And then I go to open them up on my CS4 that's on the computer, and it's like, we don't support this. No problem. I go to Adobe's website, I download the updater, but the updater only loads into CS5 and 5.5, and CS6 is just about ready to come out. So now I've got RAW files that I can't even, I'm gonna get a little bad here. I can't even frickin' look at the pictures except on the back of the camera. So annoying. So I go to Olympus's site and I download Olympus's software, which is free software. My daddy says good things are not cheap, cheap things are not good. That free Olympus software, I couldn't convert a RAW to a JPEG without it crashing. Now, how much time did I waste on playing with all this? This was about an hour and a half's worth of solid downloading, working, yada, yada, yada. And in the end, it didn't even work. I ended up giving it to somebody, the 6 images that I wanted to use for a presentation, and he converted it, and because he had the updated Adobe Photoshop, because he spent $350 updating his stuff. Okay, the last big one is the mountain. Now, the mountain is very particular, and the mountain is when you look up and you see this huge mountain that you need to hike over to get to the top. And on top of the mountain is a gallery show in Chelsea. Okay, that's what's up on top of the Bruce Silverstein Gallery is up on top of the mountain in Chelsea. Really good-looking people drinking champagne, talking about your photography, and the stuff is selling for $4,000 or $5,000. That's up on top of the mountain. $8,000. Why not? Let's go to Everest. Okay. So what do you have to do to get to the top of the mountain? Well, you got to come up with a website. You got to come up with self-promotional pieces. You have to humble yourself in front of Mr. Silverstein. You have to get gallery representation. You have to spend a fortune on framing, because we live in a world of post-pop gigantism, which means that you can't get away with small pictures like you used to in the 40s and the 50s. You got to print really big now. And you know how much it costs to actually frame a 30 by 40 inch print? That's, if you want to do it right, that's a $400 framing. So your gallery show of 20 pieces is now going to cost, just in framing, well over $10,000. So you got to have all that. You got to have the latest equipment, because when you blew it up that big, it looked pixelized. So you have to get the Canon 5D Mark II 21 megapixel. You have to get the best scanner. You got to go through all this stuff, and you have to learn how to use all that. You have to figure everything out. So you look up at the top of Bruce Silverstein Gallery, and you know what you do? You go, I'm not going to go up to that mountain. It's too much work. It's a hurdle. It's tough. Now, I put the gallery up on top. It could be having a studio that is in New York City that is well known, and you can pay the rent every month without ever having lots of clients. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's whatever it is. It's the pathway that you need to get to fulfill your dreams of being a photographer and have your style. And when you look up at the mountain, it's so huge, so big, that you don't do it, and you end up turning on the TV and you catch up with the Kardashians. Okay. All right, so be careful of that. It's the distractions that all lead to this. All this stuff is part of the mountain. Understanding your photography, where you want to go with it, and then identifying the goal and understanding that it's going to be hard to reach there. The only way that you can climb the mountain is slow but surely. Every action has to be up. I think I'm a backpacker, is one of my sports that I do, and I backpacked with a guy one time, and I don't know if this is true. Anyone speak German here? Okay, immer geradeaus. Immer geradeaus.
Geradeaus.
Let's go. Okay. It was he would say it in this German accent. He'd go, immer geradeaus, and we would have to go up. It was switchbacks in the Olympic Mountains. It was tough, but that was the mountain. And but thanks. I always wondered if it was accurate German that he spoke. Who knows? His name was Virgil. He had to be right. He's like an Englishman. If your name's Virgil, anything you say, you're right. So that's the mountain, and the way to deal with that is just to simply piece by piece tackle it. If you can't take the time to build a website that reflects your work, pay someone to build a website. If you don't want to pay someone to build a website, get a Flickr site with just your work on it, and make sure that you filter the work. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, about filtering your work. So those are your hurdles. It is surmountable. The big one, though, is fear. And fear is probably the largest hurdle of all. Pogo, we have met the enemy and he is us. That's a Canadian comic character. And I always love that one because it's kind of important. Now, fear, I learned this one from Art and Fear. And fear is one of our biggest hurdle, even though the mountain is tremendous. But fear, we are our own worst enemy when we come to this. So fear about yourself is that I'm not good enough. I'm having trouble focusing the camera. It's not looking good. I don't know if I have enough, if I've looked at enough work that's out there to, it scares me. Everything's too hard to accomplish. I can't do this. Those are fears. I started a new project this year called Battlefield Camp, and I said that I'm going to go to Normandy and I'm going to photograph the landing beaches that the Allies, the United States, the Army landed on. And I'm going to bring an 8x10 camera and I'm going to shoot it with 8x10. And then all of a sudden I started having fears about, did I research this properly? Do I know where the landings were? Am I going to be able to match this project to what I wanted to do? And I got really nervous about it. And I said, if I go all the way to Normandy to photograph this, what if I blow it and the pictures don't come out good? And I wasted a $1,200 airfare ticket and the rental car, and I blew $2,000 on this, and it just doesn't come out good. But I had to overcome that fear. And I did really, on one night, I did totally fall apart. Now, what about when I get done with this? What if people don't understand the work? What if they don't like it? Okay, fear about what others think of your work, take it out of the equation. It doesn't matter. Simply create the work. That's the way you have to overcome this one. Don't worry about what people will think about you. For those of you that play on Flickr and like the comments and whatnot, I'll take a negative comment, I'll take a positive comment, as long as there's a comment made. If there's a criticism made, I'm happy. Hate my work. Tell me why you hate it. Say, please do, say it's simple, it's banal, whatever. I want you to have an opinion, that's all good. Perfection. You know, I'm not gonna shoot this project because I'm gonna wait for the new Nikon D800 camera. You guys heard about the D800 camera? It's gonna be the greatest camera ever. It's gonna have enough pixels to do everything. It's always gonna focus. It's gonna see in low light. It's gonna do everything. So I'm not gonna go out. I'm gonna wait for this Normandy trip until I can get that camera, because if I spend all this effort and time, why not do it with the best camera possible? That's not even out yet. But anyway, perfection. Seeking perfection, you can never get to perfection. If you go to Bruce Silverstein Gallery and you're like, look at those beautiful 50 by 90 inch prints. I gotta make those. And then you look at the printer and the cost at the lab, and it's really expensive, and you don't make a print because it can't be big, because it can't be perfect and big. Don't worry about that. You can't attain perfection. You can't. I have a show that I said is up in Buffalo, and I like to be a perfectionist, and I have 13 pictures, and I have to say that one of them, Fireball Bill, I don't like the printing on. I was one of the first prints that I made in this series, and I need to go back into the darkroom and adjust the printing so it more is in line with the other 12 prints. I think I'm the only person who noticed that, but it's about perfection. It's trying to get there. So, next time I go into the darkroom and print Fireball Bill, I'll remember and I'll print it with a grade 3 instead of a grade 4 filter, but that's another story. What are your expectations? My expectations on my project with Battlefield Kent going to Normandy were enormous. This is my new body of work. I'm really excited about this. But you need to manage your expectations. What do I want to do with this work? Well, I want to get it up into a gallery. I'm not going to get into Bruce Silverstein Gallery, unless Bruce Silverstein's watching this video. Hey, brother, you should take a look at my work. You've only turned it down 5 times. But at least look at it this time. No, I can't. But manage your expectations. When we did this show up in Buffalo, I thought to myself, I spent around $1,400 in framing, and I really shopped that, and I worked this one frame shop down really bad. But I'm very happy with the work they did for me. But you know what? I was dropping over $1,000 in today's economy. Hook me up here. Don't charge me $2 grand, like another store was trying to do. I knew that it was Buffalo, it was a depressed economy, and I'm probably not going to sell any prints. I set my expectation very low. Much better than saying, I have to sell 5 prints to cover my expensive framing. I have to sell I knew nothing's going to sell. I ran a gallery. Notice I work at B&H now, I don't run a gallery anymore. Okay, so I understand, sales, don't worry about that. Just create the work, move forward. I think you can set an expectation, you can set a goal for yourself. And I'll tell you, this show, it got reviewed in the Buffalo paper, and when the guy drops off the work, Wayne Geist, the gallerist, drops off the work in my house, what will I have? I'll have 13 beautiful frame photographs that I can put up into the next gallery right away. My goal on this one wasn't to sell work, it was to get the work in frames, all done, signed, numbered, all the CV, all the stuff that a show, the gallery statement, all that junk is all written and done. Now all I need is more walls to show this stuff on. My expectation isn't to sell it, my expectation is to keep the work out of storage and keep it up on walls. So you should put an expectation for yourself. Okay, who here is a friend of Frank Herbert, the Dune series? Okay, for your sci-fi geek if you are. I always love this one, and sometimes there was a secret sisterhood, and what they would do is I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings about total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And where it is gone, I'll turn and I'll see the path that I went through fear. And I think that's a wonderful thing to look at. Just basically, fear is the mind killer. Fear will keep you from creating that work. It'll keep you from moving forward, and it'll let you lock on to things that are easier to accomplish, like watching TV or having dinner or gorging the big bag of Doritos and the dip. These are all things that you kind of lock on to instead of creating the work and moving forward to. One more fear thing, I like to talk about Devo, the 80s band, which I did notice they're playing at Irving Plaza in a couple of weeks, but I like the whip it. This is like a little mantra I say to myself. I got to whip it. I got to whip it into shape, get into shape. It's a silly song, but I like the this part here. My favorite one is go forward, move ahead. I love when the Devos guy says that. Because going forward and moving ahead is simply that. It's, you know what, I'm going to go to Wall Street once. I'm going to go again. I'm going to work with this lens and these modes, and I'm going to create this body of work. Just go forward, go straight, move ahead. Get that work in there. Get on it. Okay, this is a big one. Anatomy of photographic style. We're going to break down photographic style. So is everyone having fun so far? Yeah. Is it good? Okay, cool. Good. Okay, so I realize this one, the first one, your attitude, your emotions, and your upbringing, as something that is part of the baseline of work that you do, especially when you're trying to get onto that road of style. And we did a presentation here. Every January we host the F295 Symposium, and we're doing it again. I think it's January 15th this year. And we have a panel of alternative photographers, alt-pro photographers that come up here, meaning that these are photographers that don't work in a traditional sense. They work with cyanotypes, they work with platinum palladium, they work with different pinholes, they do things a little bit differently. So this guy stands up, and he showed his work, and I forgot his name. I really should remember his name as I'm talking about him. But his work is very pretty pictures of New York scenes. Are you guys familiar in Dumbo, down underneath the Manhattan Bridge in Brooklyn? There's a cobblestone street that if you look up, you get the confluence of the Manhattan and the Brooklyn Bridge. It's like the classic, it's like probably the best picture you can make of the street. The thing is that everybody who shoots there kind of looks iconic. You know, those bridges have been up for a while. It's easy to make that photograph. This guy does a hand-colored gum print with dyes, and he shoots it with large format, and it's really beautiful. He had other pictures of New York street scenes, really beautiful, very nice color palette, looked really nice. He stands up here, he shows these beautiful photographs, and he says, I come from a good family, no trauma. It was a normal family. I had a good upbringing. I enjoy my life. I make pretty pictures. And I realized that his work shows right through to it. Now, I thought back to Joel Peter Whitkin, a guy who works with cadavers. I mean, so what was going on in Joel Peter Whitkin's as he was growing up? Now, you know, much like the other artists, I grew up in a standard nuclear family. Everything was good. My father didn't beat me. We had a little poodle. It was all nice. Everything was wonderful. I love my mom. She was great. I had a brother. Everything was normal. No, you know, I didn't have that uncle who would be like, sit on my lap. Actually, my uncle, he did other cool stuff. My uncle he turned me on to photography, Uncle Harold. So, you know, wherever you are now, Uncle Harold, thanks for that showing me photography. And he was the only guy in the family I played chess with. But it was your attitudes, emotions, and upbringings that are going to affect your art. So I'm going to say this much on this. Don't fight your attitude, emotions, and your upbringing when it comes through to your art. Embrace it. And when I say embrace it, let's say that you had a challenging childhood. Now, we're not going to get into a circle and talk about this. I'm not going to go that forward. But what I am going to say is that let your work, let it come out. Let it work out. If you did have a disturbing childhood, something was wrong, there were some traumas, experience that. Sally Mann, when she lost her father, she changed her work to a body of work that was called What Remains. And she started photographing, decomposing. She would like take a rabbit or a deer and photograph it at different stages of decomposition. Sounds pretty morbid. I'm sorry that I lean towards morbid, but I was at a Peter Murphy concert last night. So what it says is that she embraced this issue with losing her father, and she channeled it into her artwork. I went through a period of work when my mom passed away, and it was going to cemeteries in Europe, shooting in black and white and hand coloring it. Let me tell you something. Sitting there hand coloring these fiber-based prints, it felt so good to work that out. And it was. The show was dedicated to my mom, and it felt good to work it out. Okay, genre and subject. This is probably the biggest part of anatomy of the photographic style. And the problem with genre and subject is that sometimes we can be all over the place. What we need to do is we need to focus on a genre, we need to focus on a subject, and let that be the driving factor in the work that we photograph henceforth. And I'm going to talk in more detail about genre and subject in the next couple of slides. But note, though, this is probably one of the most important ones. If your body of work is all over the place, which it's really easy for that to happen, we need to identify that. Shooting technique. Shooting technique is the way that you actually make the photograph. Now notice the concept of genre and subject I put right next to shooting technique because they're equally important. You're going to have to learn to shoot a certain way to develop this style, and you're going to have to be consistent with it. Is there a message in the work? A big one, did anyone check out the Lizette Modell show that was at Bruce Silverstein last month? Okay, so it was a wonderful show, and boy, there was a message that was coming out. It was like her subjects were speaking. So we want this message to be very clear. She told Sean Kernan. Sean Kernan's a photographer, he's a mentor of mine. I interviewed him, you can watch the video of it. Sean Kernan went and showed her some work, and she looked at the work and she says, "What is it saying? Does it have a voice?" And it really affected him. And from that point forward, he wanted to really work a voice into it. So I think the message is important. For those of you, let's just go to an easy one. You're Occupy Wall Street. When you went down there, did you photograph the placards that said the slogans and the sayings? That's important. That was the message. That was, if you go to Occupy Wall Street, you definitely need to get those messages that people are saying. So that's important to get that. Treatment. What do we do with the photograph? Treatment is how we print it, it's how we view it, it's how we show it. It's what we do with the photograph after we take the picture. Do we print it on fiber paper? Do we print it on museo paper? Do we print it on torchon paper? Do we print it on luster paper? Do we make really big prints of it? Do we work with it in cyanotype? Terry's the owner of one of my cyanotypes. Don't you think that picture lends itself very well to the subject matter? It's blue. It comes together. So the treatment worked with the whole message. It worked with the shooting technique. The genre was all complete. It happened to be all together. We need to pay attention to this treatment, how we actually show our work. Finally, the presentation itself. Do we put it, who here has done a photographic show, had hung work? Okay, do you remember when you made a big consideration on the framing? How did you actually frame the work? Did you mount it on plexi so it's just a full bleed picture, or did you put it into a mat with a conventional frame? Did you cheap out and buy the Nielsen and Bainbridge aluminum frames, or did you actually go and use wood frames that are a little more expensive? There's if you're into this one, if you're printing big, I just saw for 50 bucks each at a, I can email you the name of the shop. I was dropping off clothes at a Goodwill shop on, I think, 19th Street. But they had stacks of really nice wooden frames, and the top of the frame was an oval. So it wasn't a square frame. And I looked at that pile and I was like, oh, I could put work in these frames. If you bought 6 of these frames and just put work that fitted into those frames, how cool it would be. And they had stacks of them. They had rectangular ones as well. But presentation, you know, I'm looking at like vintage frames in a thrift shop, but it was a ton of them. And I thought immediately that could be a show, could go that way. The way that you show the work. Okay, so now we're going to go into details on this stuff, and we're going to talk about everything we just discussed. We're going to go into greater detail. So, genre. I've got some list of genres here: journalism, wedding, abstract, street, nature, wildlife, landscape, cityscape, fashion, lifestyle, vernacular, aerial, toy camera, abstract, still life, nude, nocturnal, fetish, portrait, astrophotography. Anyone take their cameras and put them onto spotting scopes? Digiscoping? It's cool stuff. It's great stuff. Infrared, panorama. Anyone like to work with wide panoramas? There's a guy named John Orcutt, only does panoramas. Really cool stuff. Nensha, photography. Macro, spirit, VR, virtual 360 work. Underwater work, just working underwater. These are genres. Now, can you pick? I want you to look at these and think, which genre do you fall into? What do you like to photograph the most? What are you most passionate about? Now, did I forget anything on here? Can anyone name a genre that isn't listed?
Travel.
What's that?
Travel photography.
Travel photography. You know, macro's there. Yep, that's there, right? Macro's there. Macro, yeah. Okay, let's go back to travel photography. Thanks for saying that. Travel photography is not there, but great eye. I think it's the one that I left off just to see if we were paying attention. But travel's not there. Anyone? Yes.
Street photography.
Street photography. Street photography is another one. Street photography, by the way, is one of the toughest ones to own as far as a style goes. The street photography is a rough one. It's very difficult to own it. It can be done, but it's tough. Yes.
Science, engineering, and documentary.
I think documentary.
Kind of journalism.
Yeah, it's a type of journalism. So there's a couple that aren't listed here because there's a lot of genres out there. And does anyone know about Nensha?
No.
Nensha's cool. Nensha is where you take a negative and you put it on your forehead and you think about an object or a situation, and then you develop the negative and it transfers onto the negative.
No.
Okay, look it up. Write it down, right? Mention photography. Look it up. Because it's right up there with spirit photography. And who thinks that spirit photography is really a genre? I got news for you. A couple of years ago in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, there was a spirit photography show. It was a movement in the 30s and 40s and a little bit of the 20s where, like, when Houdini was around and they would try to photograph ectoplasm. You know, Peter Venkman was a great practitioner of spirit photography. He's a Ghostbuster. Come on, guys. Peter Venkman? Dr. Venkman? Okay. All right, so anyway, so these are some genres that you should work with. Now, what I recommend is that you choose a primary genre and you stick to it. Now, notice I say a primary genre. Primary is okay. Well, primary is the way you should go, and it's okay to have a secondary or a tertiary genre that you should be working in. But I'm going to say that I don't think you should really go beyond a tertiary. You should stick to the primary and really concentrate on that one and research that. Your secondary ones and your tertiary ones will be genres that you can work in and you can kind of play with and experience and work with your cameras, but really you should be passionate and choose a primary one. Now, it can change, but it can't change from week to week. Okay, so you can practice a genre and stay in it for a decade or so, experience it, play with it, and then you can move on. But definitely spend at least a decade on a particular genre. Okay, the secondary genre. This is what I'll tell you. It's okay to work with this, and I think that's fine. But there's things that you're going to learn on the primary that you're going to bring to the secondary, and I'll show you some examples of this shortly. But this is growth. It shows maturity. Now notice I said stick with it for a decade, 10 years. Here's the important thing about this one, and you know, Tempest Fugit, time does fly, doesn't it? It really does. I mean, like, you know, just some milestones. 9/11 was a decade ago. It's hard to believe it, but what camera were you shooting with 10 years ago? What were you doing 10 years ago? And see if that relates, if you're still sticking with it, if you're still onto it. And it's okay to take your time and spend decades working on the same subject. The photographer Jacques Sturgis, who's a wonderful photographer who documents a family in a nudist colony, has been shooting the same family for over 40 years. That's a long body of work. And it's really, you can see the evolution. And in terms of style, Jacques Sturgis, I could pick his picture out in a heartbeat. I know exactly what he looks like and what he's doing. I'll even recognize his subjects. So here's the thing, Battlefield Can't, that I've been talking about. It's a project that I started this year. This is Omaha Beach dog green sector. If you're familiar with the movie Saving Private Ryan, this is what they had across under machine gun 42 fire from Germans, from the Nazis that were occupying. This is the Pointe du Hoc memorial to the Rangers that climbed Pointe du Hoc. And lastly, this is an open field where a plane, when the initial invasion was happening, one of the gliders went down. They had jeeps in the back of the plane. The jeep came forward and landed on a general that was in the plane, killing him, and it was found in this field. So would everyone say on these three photographs, and looking at the Seattle suspects' work, can you kind of see a little bit of something going on here? Stuck with black and white. Backgrounds are very, very vacant, exactly. It kind of, even though this is 8x10 landscape work, you can kind of trace it to the 35 millimeter portrait work that I was doing. It's an evolution, and I think that this is a key to try to, something totally different, but try to take from where you went in the past and keep that voice moving forward on it. Okay, shooting technique, everyone's down with this one. So we're gonna ask three questions. First question is, are you gonna capture analog or digital? Now, I know that we live in a digital world right now, and there's probably a few of us shooting film here. Who still shoots film on a regular basis? Okay. That's why my Kodak stock is crippling. But okay, one person still shoots film. So if you're working in digital, that's great. You're working with the new cameras, and you've got all that. You got to figure out software. You got to work on a lot of stuff when you're going to do that. But so you're working digital. Second question is that are you going to capture your work under strobe or available light? Because strobe light has a certain look and available light has a certain look. So available light means that you're working with, if you're shooting people portraits, you're working with available light. There's a big window. You like to shoot at a certain time of day when the light pours on that window. You've got one reflector on the side to kick the light back. That has a certain soft diffused look. Maybe you do nature photography, you do macro photography. Are you working with available light and maybe some small reflectors, or are you taking ring lights? Or are you taking strobes, TTL strobes, and putting them off to the side? Are you taking those strobes and are you putting them in a Gary Fong light diffuser? Or are you putting them in a LumaQuest diffuser? Or are you putting them in a Westcott Micro Apollo softbox? These are questions that you're working with your light, and you're going to have to tailor that light so that your light has a consistent look. So if you're working with available light, you're typically working with the same light in the day. Maybe you're doing orchid work and you're capturing this stuff at 7 a.m., 6 to 7 a.m. in the morning when the light is just a certain way. That's how you would control that. If you're doing this macro work, this orchid work with studio strobes, you have to use a consistent level of strobe, and light modifiers for the strobe should be the same. If you constantly change your light modifiers, how can you ever expect your photographs to look exactly the same light? They won't. You got to work with one particular one. Did you hear me before talk about the strobes that I used for the Seattle Suspects? Do you guys remember what it was? It was a beauty dish that was on a boom arm, a Bogen Super Boom. So a beauty dish is a big white reflector, a real big one, about a 16 or 18-inch reflector, that was sitting up on top of a boom arm, so the light was pouring down, and that was coming on one side. On the other side was a strip light. Strip light was a real thin softbox with one strobe inside of it, about this tall, about that thin. And what it would do is it would create this little line that would go down the side of the subject that it was on, while the beauty dish was a nice soft directional light from one coming from up on top down. I used to always say it was like God's light coming down on them. So you have to customize that kind of work. Okay, the third question, are you going to shoot on location or are you going to shoot in the studio? Now this is a big one. My wife, I'm going to show you some work. That's the psycho that I live with. She likes to, she shoots at certain times of the day, available light coming through our windows, and we've got this big building next to us that captures and bounces the light. It's the biggest reflector in New York City. It's Tower 31. So you can, she likes to shoot on location, but she's shooting, she doesn't like to take her stuff out of location. She wants to do it in her own apartment. So the studio. Or it could be a location where maybe you take portraits of people, but you do it on location. You won't shoot in the studio with backdrops. You like to do your photography strictly in on cobblestone streets that are wet. Maybe you like to shoot, you want to do, let's just go back to the Occupy Wall Street one and use that as an example. You go down and you shoot Occupy Wall Street, you do nice tight close-ups of the face and the board that they're holding. Maybe that's the way, you always think on location, the background, you like to shoot wide open so that you're using telephoto lenses and the background goes softly out of focus. Those are ways that you could shoot on location. Be consistent with those techniques. Digital capture. Okay, so pretty much all of you except for one person's working strictly in digital. So real quickly, we're going to talk about that. Are you working with a point and shoot digital camera? Because I'll tell you right now, point and shoot cameras these days are practically as good as the full digital SLRs that are out there. That's a pretty broad statement. The part that you really got to work with this is that if you have a point and shoot digital capture camera, it should work with RAW. It should be able to capture RAW images. Should capture RAW and JPEG at the same time. If you've got a small digital point and shoot that only does JPEG, it's not really serious, and if you've taken the time out to listen to this class, you owe it to yourself. Make sure that you've got a digital point and shoot camera that is capable of capturing RAW. Because when you capture RAW, you can really control the image much more, and you can do some really fun stuff to it, which I'll be talking about in a second. So we haven't released the event yet, but coming up on December 19th, we're going to get 90 of these cameras and you'll be able to try them out. This is a Leica X1. It's a digital point and shoot camera with a really good 24mm non-zoom lens. And you'll notice on the back of it, what do you see? Rule of thirds. You see those lines there, right? But it's black and white. It's not color. I got it in black and white mode. So I have this camera set up where it takes RAW photos, the RAW photo and a JPEG photo at the same time. I've got black and white JPEGs are showing up in the back, but it's capturing in RAW format, which gives me all the color information. And if I want, I can do it. I can downgrade that, discard the color information, and just get black and white images from the RAW file. So I'm shooting JPEG and RAW. RAW gives me color, the JPEG is black and white. Why am I shooting black and white? Because when I capture the images, I'm looking for black and white pictures. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, about style, choosing a picture style. Okay, if you're working with a DSLR, then you've got a lot more choices in terms of lenses. Working with a DSLR, your choices are going to be a full frame, which is like a Canon 5D, Nikon D700, I think that was a Sony A77, I think is full frame. Those are full frame cameras, and
It's not full frame.
it's not full frame. No,
APS.
which is the Sony that does?
The 900 is.
The 900, thank you. Sony 900 is a full frame camera. When you work with a full frame capture camera, you have to think about your focal length and your lenses. So that's why I said if you're doing this one, you've got to think about your choices of lenses, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. APS-C size is the more common digital format that's out there. It's a slightly smaller sensor, and what it does is it magnifies your focal length. So you have to be conscious of that because focal length is so important for style. We'll get into that in a moment. The mirrorless cameras are usually have a micro four thirds or a smaller sensor, but they don't have single lens reflex. You're looking through the electronic viewfinder, but they're very small and they're easy to travel with. So if you're working with a mirrorless camera, you're probably more suited towards travel photography. And mirrorless cameras like wide angles better than they do telephotos. Medium format digital. If you're doing professional work and you want to really charge a lot, who wants to be a professional photographer here? Okay. There is a truthism in this, but you have to impress your client, and your client is going to know gear because they work with different photographers and art directors work with different photographers. So if you take out a Hasselblad H4D camera, you can now double or triple your day rate. And you stand a better chance of getting away with it because you're working with a more pro camera. The medium format cameras, though, aren't as versatile. You don't run into these super zoom lenses. Usually you work with a medium format digital camera, you're probably working with one focal length, one lens, two probably at the most. The lenses are very expensive. Okay, now if you're working large format, that changes your workflow tremendously. If you want to work digital photography and still work with a large format camera, 4x5, 5x7, 8x10, there are backs that you can get. They're called scan backs, and they're very expensive. Actually so expensive that we don't even sell them here at B&H. So they're called scan backs. You can get backs for 4x5 cameras, probably you're looking at around $20,000. But then you get the advantage of tilts and shifts and working with dark cloths and working with a large format digital camera. I would like to, that is way beyond, that mountain, that's a mountain range that I ain't gonna go to. That's far away, but that's good stuff. So I like to shoot film for large format and scan it later on. So that's kind of my shtick about digital capture. And I don't want to go, this isn't a technique class into how you're going to use these cameras, but you should lock onto these cameras and be aware of them. I just want to say one more thing about point and shoot. The photographer Antonin Carvaccio, who's one of the 7 founders of the 7 agency, he's also a Canon Explorer of Light, which is a really good position to be in. The Canon Explorers of Light get all the new Canon cameras from Canon for free to try out. Wonderful stuff. So this guy really likes his Canon PowerShot G12, yet he can play with 1DS Mark 9, DXXS, EOS 1, DSX, all those cameras. He prefers his G12. He does conflict photography and he gets himself into places with that G12 that he couldn't get himself into with the big cameras. So just imagine being in Tahrir Square in Egypt and trying to cover that. If you have a big Canon or a big Nikon camera, what are you going to be?
Target.
Target, exactly. What if you take out a small camera and you're just like, you grab a quick shot. Those are the, you shoot differently when you work with different cameras. Okay, this is a fun one. For digital photographers, have you played with your in-camera styles? This is really cool. This is the fast track to attaining style. They even call it a style. So last year I was playing with the Nikon Coolpix 7000, which has now been replaced by the Coolpix 7100. If you're looking for a really good point and shoot digital camera that has raw capabilities, the Nikon Coolpix P7100 and the Canon G12 are on the top of the litter. They're wonderful cameras. So I put the camera in a black and white mode, and when I get black and white, I got really good stark black and whites. You can also do a sepia mode. Now the sepia mode on the camera, you can put the camera, you can tell the camera to shoot sepia, and then there's different levels of sepia you can go. This is the smallest level of sepia. And you see how it's slightly warmer than this print? It's very subtle. I could have dialed in the sepia a little bit heavier if I wanted to, but it's a very subtle sepia that's there. This is the vivid mode. So up on top, we've got, oh wow, let's look at that on. Up on top, I have the vivid mode engaged. On the bottom is the standard mode. So I took the same picture twice, and the vivid mode just punches the colors up a little bit. For those of you that did shoot film back in the day, do you remember Fuji Velvia?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember Kodachrome? Two different looks, right? Kodachrome had a warmth look to it. Velvia was vivid and very punchy, very contrasty. So you can play with that in the in-camera styles. What I like about this is that a lot of these cameras that are out there, I've been testing this Leica X1, and this camera has a mode called Profiles. And right in the back, it says User Profile, and it has 3 profiles stored into it. So profile number 1, I told the camera to shoot in, let's look at it here. I did black and white mode, but it gave me black and white. It was a preset film mode, and it was high contrast. So I was choosing the black and white mode with contrast. So I decided that all the pictures I was going to take with this camera, I was going to shoot black and white to maintain the style, and I was going to shoot it with this high contrast mode. So I would get blacker blacks and whiter whites, and I would get less grays going on. So I went into that mode. I have it set up where I've got the RAW going, and I've got a JPEG file. So I get the RAW. So what if I shoot a really good picture, but it would work better in color? I still have that information on the memory card. Memory cards are really cheap now, 8 gigabytes under 20 bucks. So put large cards in the camera and shoot JPEG and RAW with a picture style on it. When you do the picture style and you shoot black and white and RAW, or RAW and JPEG, your JPEG will show you black and white in the back of the camera, but the RAW one, you've got that color photography going on. And you see the world differently in black and white. I kind of like that. So this is a Leica camera that has a fixed lens, a 24 millimeter lens, and I'm shooting in black and white. Very classic way to work with black and white, with a wide angle, very Bresson-like. Not Bresson didn't work as wide as 24, but it's a classic way to shoot. So these in-camera styles are fun. So what I would recommend is that tweak these styles, go into your camera modes, find the style, and start to experiment with them and play around with it. But you can fine-tune it. You can do sharpening, you can do contrast, you can do the vividness, you can do black and white with sepia, black and white with purple. You can do all these different effects. So fool around with that and play with it. And then what I would recommend is once you start to kind of like something, most of these good cameras I'm talking about, the P7100, the G12, they can allow you to save settings. So I've got 3 user settings in this one. I've got it set up one particular way, and then in the colorway, I have another user setting that's saved in a particular colorway. And it's cool to play with this because it'll help you focus into your style by making things look a certain way. Now, set up an in-camera style and shoot a year's worth of photographs just that way. That's an exercise for you. And why I say do it that way is you can say it's a treatment, not quite a shooting technique, but the treatment is the way that you treat the photograph you're taking. So this is going to get you into shooting contrasty black and whites, shooting warm black and whites with sepia tone, or shooting very vivid or very contrasty photographs. It's a way that you can imbue a style into a particular group of photographs working with the same camera. Fun stuff. Everyone down with that? Any other questions on styles? Like that. They call it every company calls it different things, but it's certainly in there, and you'll find it on the better cameras. So this is Lauren Meyerhoff. She works here at the event space, and she got married. And I grabbed a Pentax K7 camera. I took the widest lens I could get, a 14 millimeter 2.8 camera. I put it into black and white mode, and I shot contrasty. And I just took little pictures of her wedding like this. Now, why would I shoot with that camera? What was my reason for this? First off, I wanted to give her some black and white photos because I knew the wedding photographer that was doing it for her was going to give her straight up color photos. So I also chose a really wide angle lens that normally who shoots a wedding with a 14 millimeter lens? I want to give her something a little bit different. Now I'm a little schizophrenic because I'm the B&H guy and I have to test all these different cameras. How many cameras do you have?
I have to count.
That's good. It's a good answer. I have to count. Hope you bought them all here. Okay, now how many cameras do you have?
I've got one.
You got one, okay. Working with one camera keeps you very uncluttered. It's easy to know one camera, understand the menus and everything. But when you work here to do this job, I have to work with a lot of cameras. So it's kind of tough to go a little crazy with all those cameras. But it's kind of a cool shot, isn't it? Good stuff. It looks good. She hasn't seen them yet. She's going to be excited. Okay, this is a big one. Your sole focal length. How many lenses do you have? You know how many lenses? What are you here for? You said, you know how many lenses you know, you shoot. How many lenses do you have?
I'm down to one because I've changed from Nikon.
I like that, down to one. That's awesome. Okay, does anyone have over 4 lenses? Okay, you do. What do you have?
I have 5.
Yeah, 5.
I just used 1.
Excellent, good. That's what I'm trying to get down to. Your best shots seem to be with the same focal length, and I like to call this your sole focal length. The first observation I made about photographic style, the great photographers that are out there are working with very limited focal lengths. Most of the most popular focal length among the classic photographers is the 35 millimeter focal length, because 50 millimeter is normal, 35 is just slightly wide. So Bresson, he worked with a 35. Robert Frank worked with a 35. A lot of these guys worked with 35 millimeter. Now, if you were working with an APS-C size sensor camera and you wanted to work within that genre, that 35 millimeter, that's slightly wide yet not overtly wide like that last picture, that's super wide. If this was shot with a 35, it would have been much more cropped. If you work with an APS-C size sensor, then your lens you want to work with should be a 24 millimeter focal length. Because 24 millimeter times 1.5 or 1.6 is 32 to 35 millimeter. But 24 translates to 35 millimeter really easily. Who here works with an 18 to 200 millimeter zoom lens? Okay, a couple of you guys do. Be very careful of the super zoom category, because the super zoom category, you tend to zoom it quite a bit and you don't walk forward or walk backwards to capture your image. So what happens is you're using all different focal lengths. Now, I want you guys to write this one down. I want you to take a look at the metadata on your digital photographs. So use Adobe Lightroom or use Photoshop Bridge and look at the metadata. Will tell you what focal length that the image was shot at. And it will usually do the math for you. So if you use an 18 to 200 millimeter, an 18 millimeter lens, and you've got it on a Canon Rebel, the equivalent focal length would be around 28 millimeter. So it'll say, I think it'll give you the conversion. But I want you to look for your favorite photographs and notice that they're almost always going to be the same focal length. It's pretty amazing. It's your sole focal length. It's the same focal length. If you use it all the time, your images tend to look the same. If you work with a telephoto, let's say you do travel photography, and you have an 18 to 200 millimeter lens, and you're walking through a square in Prague, and you look up and you see this amazing architecture, and you take your 18 200 millimeter lens and you zoom all the way out and you start getting details of the work. Let's say that instead you stay wide angle and you get the square and you get the building. Or you start to shoot all wide angles. Each one will have a different look. So I know that detail's up there and you want to capture it. But maybe the best way to capture that detail would be for you to go up to that building or in an adjacent building and see if you can get access to a window and shoot at wide angles so that the detail you were trying to get is there, but then you've got a wide angle of the cityscape in the background. That would be a way to approach the style of travel photography with the same focal length and get it all. But it takes a little bit more work. Could you imagine walking into an adjacent hotel? I'm not a guest there. They don't speak the language, but you need access to their roof or to a window. Really tough, but it can be done, and that's what a National Geographic photographer would do. So be careful of that wide assortment of lenses. Lenses have specific jobs. So be careful of that zoom. If you are working with a zoom lens, that's okay, but try to stay around the same focal length most of the time, and I would aspire to getting a prime lens. A prime lens is a non-zoom lens. So prime lenses help you stay within style, because when you have a prime lens on it, you can't zoom. There's no cheating, which is a big one. You're thinking about it. See, there's no cheating when you have a prime lens. If you need to fill that image with that detail, you have to get closer to it, or you've got to position yourself in a certain way. So these are some primes I recommend getting. The 50 millimeter 1.8 lens is very inexpensive. They're around $99 to $130, and Canon, Nikon makes them. They're inexpensive. Now they have a version of the 50 millimeter 1.4 lens. The 1.4 lens lets in more light, and you can basically shoot in lower light, and depth of field can get a little bit more blurry in the background when you work with the 1.4. The 1.4 lens, though, you're going to jump in price to around $300, $350 for a 51.4. It's good. You made a note that it's a half stop. It's not even a full stop. It does come across two ways. It's a half stop, but it's a good half stop.
But it mattered more when we were manually focusing. Now that we've got autofocus, it even matters less.
true, but the one more detail.
Because he's talking with a British accent.
See, does he? Okay, I agree with you. I agree with you. It's not a big jump, but you know what is a big jump is that the lens, the 1.4 lenses have metal backs and are generally better quality glass than in the 1.8. But the 1.8, if you wanted to make better photographs, let's say you have a zoom lens, maybe the kit lens that came with your camera, and you want to make better photographs and kind of zero into a style, the 50 millimeter 1.8 is just a great entry level into that. Now there's 20 millimeter and 24 millimeter 2.8s, which are really good. There's another one I didn't list, but I would take a look at it. There's the 35 millimeter 1.8 lens that's generally available only for APS-C size, and that's Nikon makes it. It's around $200. It's a beautiful lens. When you do the math with that one, it becomes like a 60 millimeter 1.8, but it's a great lens for the money. A fisheye is very specific, and I'd like to say that a fisheye is a bag of tricks. I'm not telling you to buy a fisheye, but if you want to experiment with a fisheye, and I'll show you some photographs from it, it's definitely, when you shoot with a fisheye, you've got a certain look and a style that a fisheye owns. Lens Baby, I recommend a Lens Baby if you want to experiment with something right way out there. A Lens Baby is an element that's on a ball and socket, and it creates a very specific look. Lens Babies, they do have a silly name, but you buy a Lens Baby for each particular camera mount. So you buy a Lens Baby for Nikon, or a Lens Baby for Canon, Lens Baby for Sony, and it will fit on there, and it gives a certain look. I think I have some examples of a Lens Baby shot, but we'll show that in a little bit. Okay, another one is that choose the angle that you predominantly like to shoot in. Angle is a big deal. If you shoot everything with the same angle, you're going to get known for that as far as a look. So we've got Chip Simmons on the side. Chip Simmons is a big rule breaker. He likes to work with extreme wide angle lenses, and he likes to choose, and very often, a low angle. He worked with a low angle for a period of time. His body of work was all low angle. This is Vincent Laforet's work. Vincent Laforet became known as the guy who made the first movie with the Canon 5D Mark II. Does everyone know Vincent Laforet? Yeah. Is it one of, I've got his link on there. You're a great photographer. Vincent Laforet also, he really cut his teeth as an aerial photographer, and he became known as this high vantage viewpoint. Like, he did a beautiful cover a couple years ago for New York Magazine, and he shot he got in the building across from Bryant Park up on the top and did a great shot of, you know that picture, he did a great shot of the skating rink called The Pond in Bryant Park. And it was very abstract, because when he shoots these things, the beach scene from up above, it's got a certain look to it, and he became very known for that. He shot up on top of the, very frequently, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. He's spoken here, and he told stories about being on the top of the antenna of the Empire State Building. Talk about getting over your fears. There's just, you know, he had to conquer that fear to climb up there. I mean, I don't know, if you offered me that, I don't know if I would. Well, I certainly wouldn't do it with an 8x10 camera, but that would be rough to get up there. So, being a B&H guy, a couple of years, my lovely wife has a home in Tuscany, which is really fun, and every summer we go to Italy, and I self-assign myself a mini project. For years I've been doing it. This year's project was called Italy Looking Up, and what happened was, I was like, well, what am I going to shoot in Italy this year? I'm like, you know, I want to work with plastic cameras, toy cameras, because I want to work with toy cameras because they're so lightweight. I didn't want to travel with heavy-duty equipment. So I got my Holga, I got my Diana, I was getting my film all set up for it. And then the Leica rep calls me up 2 days before I'm leaving, Jim Wagner. He says, Dave, he goes, I want to take you out to lunch. I got something for you. In my line of work, when the Leica rep says he's got something for you, you hook up with him. So he hands me a bag with a Leica M8.2, a 24 millimeter 1.4 Super Elmarit something lens, a Tri-Elmar lens, a 50 millimeter 2.5 collapsible, really nice stuff. You know your Leica stuff? It was beautiful lenses. And I was like, oh, thanks. Well, it's really heavy, but I was going to take a plastic camera. It was going to be a lightweight trip, but so I had to take the Leica stuff because it was sweet. It was Leica M System Digital. So I took it with me, and I'm on the plane ride going over, and I'm like, you know, I've shot all the pastoral scenes. I've shot the medieval hilltop town. I've done this body of work from shooting in Tuscany. Now I'm going to do it with a rangefinder with these great lenses. What do I really want to accomplish here? So I said, okay, every picture I take, I'm going to look up. I took no pictures straight ahead. Every shot was looking up. So that was like a little mini assignment for me. And the project ended up being called Italy Looking Up. And I'm pretty happy with this work. It was great. It was liberating to only shoot this way, to put a constraint on me that I was only going to shoot looking up. So it's an interesting way to look at photography, and I thought there was a perspective. And now I've been going, I don't normally shoot cities, but since then, anywhere I go, I've been turning the camera straight up. Now, you're not going to see this work, for maybe a decade, because I would like to see how many cities I can cover. Could you imagine like going to San Francisco and shooting that with the Transamerica building? Just going to specific cities and picking out their architecture, just shooting straight up. So who knows? It could be a good body of work. Yes?
What lenses did you use?
Well, I had an assortment of lenses. This was all wide angles. So I think that this one was probably the 24 millimeter, which was very wide. This one was probably the 35 millimeter, which was like a standard. So they were, Leica 8.2 at this period of time had a 1.3 viewfinder multiplication factor. The Leica M9 is now full frame. So you put a 24 millimeter lens on it, looks like 24. Doesn't look like a 32.
Can you see how this fits into your genre and style?
Okay, thank you. It doesn't. It doesn't, but it doesn't in a lot of ways, but it does in terms of my compositional skills and the way I like to compose. A good question was, how does it fit into the style? Also, I put a disclaimer on myself that I had to learn that camera because one of you could be on a photo safari with me and ask how I can change the ISO automatic setting to 200 to 400, so I have to know all this junk.
Well, I guess, like, what if opportunities, like if we're developing a style and then an opportunity presents itself, such as that, that's very different.
Great question. The question is what if you have an opportunity to explore, but it's outside of your genre and your subject and your style? I say go for it, but I'm going to talk to you guys about it. You don't have to show it. So in other words, you could do it, you could learn from it, but you don't have to show it.
In terms of what you're showing, you want to keep that focus.
Exactly. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. Yes?
You still have the high contrast. Almost all people
It's, thank you. Thanks. It's there. I'm looking for that. Yeah, I'm looking for contrast. I like to see contrast. I like that black and white or bright. I shot these, by the way, in raw mode. So they got them in color, and I shot them in black and white JPEG mode. I absolutely like the color much better than I did the black and white. And I had them both side by side. The color just has a nice gradation. They look really good on the plasmas. This is a little washed out from the bright lights. But yeah, thank you for saying it. Okay, so this is a specific technique called light painting. Light painting is where you hold the shutter open with the bulb mode. For those of you who've never experienced the bulb mode, put your camera in manual and dial down your shutter speed to as low as it goes. Usually your camera will go like 125th of a second, 60th of a second, 30th of a second, 15th, 8th, half, 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and then you'll see B. B is bulb mode. It holds the shutter open. So you hold the shutter open and you take a pen, you take a mini mag light or a flashlight, and you basically draw onto your subject, and you can get this crazy effects. This is Chip Simmons' work. Chip Simmons experimented with light painting very heavily. You're going to see light painting from another artist very shortly. So that's some specific technique. Can anyone point out to me another technique that's out there, not related to a shooting technique that we haven't seen yet? What's that?
with edge detection.
With edge detection. What do you mean by edge detection?
It's a software that allows you to separate wherever the contrast changes from light to dark, so you end up with a basic outline of an image.
So okay, so it's a
Yeah, it gives you a really nice effect, especially if you have someone like with very short frizzy hair or a zebra or
But that's a
You know,
software.
that's a software. That's a software, and I'm going to put that software. I'm going to put that under treatment, not a shooting technique. A shooting technique is something that you employ when you're actually photographing, but that would be definitely a post technique, which will.
What I find interesting though is trying to predict what's going to work with the technique. A lot of things just fall flat.
Accidents are wonderful things in photography. Trying to figure out what you're going to get. That's. Okay, zooming. So you have a long exposure and you zoom during the exposure? Yeah, okay, it's a beautiful technique. It's called the shotgun zoom technique. So what you do is you go shutter priority, and it only works with a zoom lens, and it can't work with an automatic point and shoot camera because usually their zooms are electronically controlled. But you've got a manual zoom on your camera. Go shutter priority and choose a 1/5 of a second, maybe a 15th of a second, and zoom it. At the same time, take the picture and zoom. You're probably gonna have to turn off your autofocus as well. Go to manual focus. So that's a cool technique. Yes.
With the old cameras, the film cameras, there was a double exposure.
Double exposure. Okay.
But it's difficult to, I don't know how to do it on.
You have to do it in post. You have to do it in post. Some cameras will build the file up that way, but you have to do it in post. Double exposure, great technique. Yes.
I think there's something called HDR.
HDR, thank you very much. A beautiful technique is HDR. It's high dynamic range. What you do is you take one picture for the highlights, one picture in the middle, one picture in the shadows, and then either your camera or software will actually flatten the image together so that you get an extended dynamic range. You get tremendous details in your highlights, you get great details in your shadows, and you run the risk of making a cartoon, so be very careful. HDR, it's 3 letters, but it's almost treated like a 4-letter word, so be careful of your HDR. It's a slippery slope, that of HDR. Okay, thank you very much for helping us talk about techniques. So want to just kind of experiment and think about that. You guys are a little slow on the beginning part, and all of a sudden they started coming out. So that's good. You have to explore those techniques. Now we're going to treatment and post-process, as we were talking about the software. So this is some iPhoneography. I practice iPhoneography, and I am polyappolous, meaning that I like to run one image through multiple apps. I keep saving it and reopening it with other apps. So on this one is the capture straight out of the iPhone, and then over here we've taken it, we put the picture into the tilt shift generator, and we've got one sharp area here. Then we put it in PS Express, Photoshop Express, another app where we converted it to black and white, and we did a softening effect, and that's how we got this. We started in this picture and we got to that. It's all done with software. Now, a popular way to do it is with digital post or working with Photoshop and some advanced stuff going on. This is from a project I tried to do and I never finished it. The image is called Park Fight, and it was she's Ambrosia. She's the last queen of sunken Atlantis. And I photographed her in the studio, knocked out the background, and then used a lot of Photoshop to build up the background. My goal with this was to create a Photoshop comic book of this one character as she goes through her story. This was her nemesis her nemesis would always attack her with skeletons. You know, like the Joker sends funny guys to kill Batman. Her nemesis sent that. She also had a pet wolf. Now I want to look at this picture very closely here. This is kind of cool stuff, a little evolution. First off, the background. Can anyone tell me what that background image is? Be abstract. Is it a what? Is it a mirror? Nope. Like a car? Okay. This is cool. This is a sand building competition, and I waited to the end of the sand building competition to when they brought in backhoes and they knocked down the sand castles. So if you look over here, here's the castle, and these little teeth up on top is the backhoe coming down on top of the castle, and it's causing the castle and the sand to all fall down. So I had photographed that shot in the very early 90s, maybe late 80s, with a slide. I was looking for a background for the image, and I wanted to show she was the last queen of sunken Atlantis. I wanted to show that she came from a land that her kingdom was devastated with age and whatnot. So I scanned that slide that I had in my archive and then dropped that in as the background. And then in a program called Poser, was able to make these skeletons and the wolf. And in Photoshop, laid a little bit of smoke in and did the whole thing. Lit her really nicely in the studio. And had a designer. This was her original outfit that she came to me with, but I had a designer named Michelle Korn from Ophelia Unbound design the actual Ambrosia superheroine costume. And the idea here was that she could kick and she could do all sorts of aerobic superhero things. But superheroes don't work good in, they don't have clothing that can allow them to do all sorts of martial arts. There's a software called Alien Skin software, and I want to mention it to you guys, and I have it on your cheat sheet. Alien Skin is not promoted, not marketed very well, but it's a series of plugins for Photoshop. I'm going to tell you this much. You guys ever play around with the filters that are in Photoshop? Okay, good. Never play with them again. The filters in Photoshop have been going around since Photoshop version 2. They're very primitive. They're not so hot. But if you work with some of these companies' plugins, they do really good stuff. There's a really good fire plugin that they have. It creates neat fire. Squint, there's their fire. They have some cool stuff going on. So you may want to take a look at that if you wanted to play in post-processing. Now here's the trick with software like this. Don't overdo it. Be careful. I got to meet Jerry Ullsman, and Jerry Ullsman is a photographer. He's one of my heroes. And I said to Jerry, I said, wow, Jerry, with the digital revolution, they're able to do what you did in the darkroom so well. Jerry Ullsman's work consisted of a lot of, he would do like layering techniques in the darkroom, sea scenes and like a building coming out of a tree stump, really great darkroom work. I said, what do you think of Photoshop, as you can do this Jerry Ullsman really crafted work pretty easily with layers? And Jerry pulls on his beard and he goes, the best thing about Photoshop is the possibilities that you can embrace with it. The worst thing about Photoshop is the possibilities that you can embrace with it. So what he's saying is that, you know, you can go crazy with these filters. Be careful going too much. Okay, so here's some analog treatments. This is the work I was telling you earlier about working with the graveyard, working out that mother passing thing. So they're hand-colored black and white work. You could very easily do this in Photoshop with a Wacom tablet. You can lay in colors, be very selective on it. It's a cool little project, and did this stuff for about a year, shot in the graveyards, then kind of got over it. Arkady Lovov is a Brooklyn-based photographer. He has a studio in Manhattan. And Arkady, he works specifically, his main body of work is still life. He takes objects, he shoots them with a large format camera, but he always shows his work in platinum palladium. His treatment is he only works in platinum. Recently, I had him over for dinner and he showed me some stuff he's been shooting at Carnival, and it's color work, and I was like, whoa, what's going on with this? And he's like, I'm still kind of working it out. I'm not really showing this work, but he's working it out. But this is his main primary work, large format, stills, and when he shows them, they're always in platinum palladium. He doesn't do silver, doesn't do inkjet, he works in platinum palladium. And that's very indicative of his style and the way he presents his work. You can really pin it very easily. Brenton Hamilton is a photographer who teaches also up at the main workshops. And Brenton is very well known for his cyanotypes. And he's been working with cyanotypes really for years and years and years. And he's a wonderful cyanotypist. He got me into cyanotypes. I fell in love with them. Certain subject matter looks really good in cyanotype. Again, this is an analog process, but he's experimenting and playing with it so much that he does gum over cyanotype. So he actually incorporates, it's a cyanotype image, and he incorporates a red ink technique over it. Really neat stuff, very analog, and he works in darkroom. He does digital negatives, so he's not digital phobic. He still works with digital negatives, but his final print has been done in an analog fashion. Okay, presentation, how you actually show your images. First thing that I talked a little bit about, post-pop gigantism, is a term that I coined, and it's about what we're living in right now. Bigger is better. When we go to galleries, we go to installations, we're seeing really big prints very commonly. Now I've noticed that there is no correlation between the quality or the impact of the print being big. In other words, I've seen some bad photography really big, but it's big, and the galleries seem to really want it and embrace it. And the only time we see smaller work now in galleries and museums, if it's older work. Not so many people are working with small prints anymore. So that's a decision you have to make. Are you going to print big? And if you're going to print big, are you going to buy an Epson 7900 printer? And how are you going to present it? Are you going to frame it or are you not going to frame it? I've seen some ways to cheat. New York Photo Festival a couple of years ago. Did anyone go out to the photo festival that happens in Dumbo? It's a cool photo festival, but they were showing a lot of work, and they were taking these pretty large size prints and they were using thumbtacks to put them up against the wall. It bothered me intrinsically. It really did. The reason that they did that was because of transportation costs for the artwork. If you're transporting framed artwork and you have a gallery that's out of town that you're going to send it to, it gets expensive to do it with. I always frame with plexi for my show prints, but if you buy a print from me, I'll get it delivered in glass, a good UV glass. But I like plexi to actually show in because it ships very inexpensively, it's lightweight, and I had a cat that was known as, he's Necron 99, the great photographic destructor. I would lay prints up against the wall when we were doing an installation, and he would run in between the prints, like the little triangle of space, and he would knock over the prints. It was awful. Anyway, to work with Plexi, you won't have to deal with that. If you don't frame, there's some other techniques you can do. I suggest that you always at least mount your photographs. You can mount them on wood at the best. You can mount them on metal. You can mount them on plexi. You can mount them on foam core at the least, but they should definitely be mounted. Do you create your own frames? I'm going to show you some work from my wife who likes to, she takes frames and she creates them specifically for the piece that is going into them. So if you're an artist, you work with frames. I did a show called Shadow Dances one time, and it was goth work, gothic dance, gothic personalities, and I had a guy named Jesse Skellington. His original name was Jesse Stevens. When he got married, he changed his name to Skellington. Seattle, he can get away with that. New York, we don't do that. But he took metal frames and he built candelabrum built into the frame. So we blacked out the windows. The entire show was lit from candles that was on each of the photographs. And he cut into the frames with welders. And when the flames danced around, the shadows that they created from when the candles danced, the shadows were wonderful on the wall. Really cool stuff. Installation, the way that you choose to show your work is very important. You can be very straightforward and take your prints in a row on the wall, or you can do some crazy stuff like taking a print and putting it in the top corner so that people have to stretch to see what the print is. Or maybe making the prints low so that you create, when the viewers see your shows, they always have to bend over. If you work with small photographs and want to show small photographs, they're cool, but small photographs, you have to walk up really closely to see the details. So that's a statement. Has anyone been to the Guggenheim and seen Maurizio Cattelan's show at the Guggenheim? Okay, guys, got to go. Write that down. Go see Cattelan at the Guggenheim. Okay, you guys have been to the Guggenheim, right? Pretty awesome museum. You go up the rotunda. You've got these like square spaces that you can see, rectangular spaces you can see the work. Cattelan, because he's such a rebel, his entire life's work, the show is called All, as in all of his work, is suspended from the main rotunda. So you don't see any work up against the walls. You've got to stand up against it. And as you travel around, you get different views of the artwork. Beautiful way to show the work. Did he get criticism from it? The Times kind of said that's not the best way to see his work, but it is certainly a unique way to see his work. It fits in with his style. Cattelan one time did a show. He locked the door of the gallery. He drilled a hole. There was a hole, a little peephole, and you had to go up to the gallery and look at your peephole, and you saw one piece. It was a gorilla on a tight wire, and that was it. He did another one where he made a mockery. All the other galleries and the shows that were out, he copied their artwork and put it. It was a weird, he does things like that. So his treatment at the Guggenheim, I got to the top and looked down and I was like, I get it. I know what he's doing. Perfectly within his style. How many guys have had solo, or how many artists have had solo shows at the Guggenheim, yet he got to demand that he wanted it that way? Cool stuff. Books. Okay, I put books on because a good way to present your work now in the world of presses, print as you go presses. You can work with Blurb, you can work with A&I book making services, you can do Apple Books. We can make books now. Who made a book 20 years ago? Who here has made a Blurb book in the past 5 years? Okay, see that beautiful avenue that we have now? We can make books. It's important that your book looks like your photography. So go to my website, check out the Seattle Suspects, and take a look at that book. That book, I worked very closely with a beautiful designer named Matt Thorne, and it was actually all the work it makes sense that work looks that way and the book works that way. So it's a good thing to make your book mirror your work. I have a beautiful Witkin book. It's the most beautiful book that I own. It was like a $400 book, and it's every page is on this, it's 21st century editions. Every page is a watercolor paper, even has the stamp on it. And the book matches his work. It has poetry in it, and even though the work complements the book. So try to keep that in mind when you design your book, that it actually looks like your work. Your website should look like your work as well, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. This is very important. If you're going to have a website and you're going to shop your work and show it out there, your website should have the flavor of your work. I'm going to show you that in detail in a little bit. Okay, let's look at some photographers with strong senses of style. So these are photographers that are important in terms of photography and not important in terms of photography, but they're important in terms of their pursuit of photography. So you may not know some of these people, you may know some of them. Okay, we're going to first start off with a very important photographer, William Eggleston. Now, why is William Eggleston such an important photographer? Who here likes to work in color work? Okay, William Eggleston, that is his gift to you. Up until the William Eggleston, all work that was shown in galleries and museums was black and white work. There was very, very, very little color, almost non-existent. William Eggleston works in color. He's got a really great style. I'm going to show you in a second. And he goes to John Sarkowski, who is the curator at MoMA in their photography department. Very important man in photography, passed away a couple of years ago. But he shows up, William Eggleston shows up to John Sarkowski, and he's got this shoebox full of 4x6 drugstore prints. And this is how John Sarkowski described his work. 4x6 prints that he had made in like the drugstores. So they were standard mini lab photographs. And he shows him this work. John Sarkowski, he was a very important voice in photography. This guy is a curator. He let a lot of photographers, gave him their chances, and he changed photography. So what William Eggleston does is he gets color photography to be accepted by the mainstream galleries and museums. And he begins this iconic journey of work where his work is a little bit lyrical, it's a little bit comical, and in William Eggleston's world, things are just a little bit off skew, yet they're common at the same time. He manages to take a color palette that's very soft, not very contrasty, and he's able to explore the world and pick out colors and pick out subjects that are normal, but they're not quite normal. His look at his freezer, I think all of us could have done something like that. But it's neat to do that. And again, there's a humor to his work, and look at the color palette that he works in. It's pretty obvious. This is a body of work that he had called Southern Suite. Would anybody like to tell me what is a common, what's the common denominator between these four photographs? No people. You got it first. No people. That's the first thing. Lack of people. The horizon, absolutely, and they're very wide open. So they're wide open spaces, no people. The color palette is definitely the same. The colors look very common. I mean, we've got an overcast sky, we've got blue skies, yet it works together. His composition, the way he lines up his photographs, they all kind of play into it. So who here likes to shoot in color? You can thank William Eggleston. He opened up a door for you. Chip Simmons is a big one for me. And Chip Simmons, I worked for the studio, and I had to cover sporting events in high schools and colleges, and they were all over the tri-state area, and I used to have to drive way ahead of time to get there to make sure I didn't get lost. This was an age before MapQuest and the internet, the late 80s, early 90s, and I used to have to call up the police departments to get directions to the schools and these weirds like Lake Hopatcon, all these crazy places. But now we would just MapQuest it. It was easy. So to get there early, I fell in love with American Photographer magazine, and there was an article on Chip Simmons. And he shot with wide angles, and he worked with weird colors. So here's one of his wide angles. He worked with the Hasselblad super wide, and he liked to play with crazy colors. And I fell in love with this guy, and he just showed me left field and what left field looked like in photography. So to show some of his work, he's got a lot of humor. That one up on top, what's going on there? He's bringing home the bacon. Okay? He's a classic 50s, Mad Men type thing, bringing home the bacon. Here's a great shot. We're on vacation, and nukes are exploding in the background, yet we're having fun. Look at the colors. Look at the lighting that he does. Very directional lighting. He likes to take gels and put them on the lights so that he gets this blue background and crazy stuff going on in the background, graduated neutral densities. Chip is cool. Chip says, we had him speak here one time, which was a great pleasure in my life to be able to be influenced by him and later on meet him at a party in the city and invite him to come here to the event space. And he says, you can either do Photoshop really, really good, or you can do Photoshop really, really bad. Photoshop in the middle looks like junk. Either you do it really good, like the National Association Photoshop guys do it, like Scott Kelby does it, or do it like me, which is really bad. So he goes, these are some corny photos. Yeah. He liked to mess with perspective. That humor comes across in his pictures. The chicken chasing the kid up the tree, the big toad. Those are some stuff. This is bad Photoshop work. Nap guys would be what's his, I can't think of his name. One of the Nap guys. He builds tremendous realities in Photoshop. But this wouldn't be good for them. But it's so bad that it works. kind of has a whole thing. Chip is amazing. He's a great photographer. Find him on the internet. Go to his website. Lots of good work. Actually, I put him on your cheat sheet. He did a lot of light painting. He went into a light painting phase, which was interesting light painting work. Dead chickens. Again, with that low perspective, he shot a lot of stuff with low angles. Really cool photographer. Definitely check out his work. Would you say a strong sense of style?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. And could you pick out his photographs in a group? Oh yeah. Because look at those crazy colors, and you know you got a Chip shot. Okay, for you that want to be a working professional, Chip actually, his work was so out there that he complains he doesn't get enough work. He also says that he's really fast in his personality. He's prone to just giggling. Like just start breaking out into a giggle. So I think he sat in front of some art directors and they were like, what's wrong with this guy? You can't hire him. But he does his own thing. Okay, so Lou Mana, though, is a New York City professional photographer. He's got a studio in New York City. He's a New York working pro, which is a dying species. Why? Have you guys seen what the cost of a 2,000 square foot studio is these days? In Manhattan, it's out of control. It's even expensive in Brooklyn. Makes it really hard to get your work done in New York. I'm ready to move to Buffalo. I did that show up in Buffalo. Wow, can you get space cheap in Buffalo? Then again, you're in Buffalo, so yeah. Lou Mana specializes in food photography. That's what his genre he's known for. Lou does shoot the occasional wedding. He does do other work. But what Lou Mana is known for is food photography. He even wrote a book on it called Digital Food Photography. So you gotta check out his website. His style, he likes to shoot in that high key, meaning a lot of big white areas, kind of like that Davidon style of shooting. He also likes to play with depth of field, which he's known for. And he's also, if you had to say, what science is he using when he photographs? He likes geometry. He really pays attention to that. He pays attention to repetitious factors. He pays attention to geometry. He likes to use depth of field. And his photography is really right on. So that as a professional photographer, you know when you hire Lou Mana, he's going to get the job done technically perfect. That's what he's very good at. He's also going to give his own sense of style, repetitious nature. He's going to give a little bit of geometry to it. It's what he's known for, and it's very easy to do. So when someone goes to hire someone, they could look at a portfolio with all this different work, wedding work, some portraiture, oh, this picture's a little sloppy, it's out of focus a little bit. But when you see Lou Mana's work, you know that you're going to get this very straightforward, technically perfect work, which is very fitting for a guy like him who's working in a city like this. Okay, we had him come and speak the other day. I just added him to this presentation. Do you guys know Peter Hurley? Was anyone here at Peter Hurley's presentation? Pretty good stuff, wasn't it? Yeah, he's good. So Peter Hurley starts off his life as a Abercrombie & Fitch and Ralph Lauren model. So he was already used to photography. He's a really good-looking guy, too. He works that, I could never get a beard like that. He just works that beard. And this is his website. And I want to look at this website, just keep this in your head, and now let's look at the work. What Peter Hurley is known for is headshots. That's his primary work. And he does a lot of different work, but his primary work is this headshot work. And what he does is he shoots with the Davidon style with the white background, but he always crops the head. That's his signature look and his style. He crops the head. Very important for him. That's what he's going to turn. Now he gets around, his headshots start at $1,100 a headshot. So who here shoots headshots at all? Does anyone do any headshots? What would you try? I need a headshot. I'm going to be on an episode of something.
$3,000.
$3,000, thank you.
If you charge more people will go for it.
But headshots, though, you see a lot of $99 headshots around town. Peter Hurley doesn't do the $99 headshot. He does $1,100 headshot. He shoots with a Hasselblad H3D or an H4D, and he always crops this way. So it's a very definitive style that he works with. So an art director or a client, I kind of interviewed some professional photographers and on their style, and they say, we shoot in this style, we show books to reflect this style, we build websites to show this style because we're really good at this style and people can expect to get this level of quality back when you hire me. So as a professional photographer, it's very important that you keep a body of work that's visible to the public that has a specific style so that people can know what to expect. One of my early websites, I had like pinhole, portraits, landscapes, cityscapes. I had all these different categories. I think you should narrow that down, make it easy for people to look at. So I played around with his website, and I saw some other stuff on his website, some more editorial fashion work. So look what he did up on top. Cut head, look at the white background, you know, good composition on it, but he really stays true to his style. So then I saw these two, I said, well, how does this reflect his style? Can anyone see a common, what's the common denominator on these two images? Off center, okay, that's composition. He knows his composition. Those headshots were off center.
Repetition.
What's that?
Repetition. The buildings on one.
Yeah, it's a location environmental portrait / fashion, so it's got a little bit. I'm going to say that he's a good photographer, right? I mean, he knows his compositions work. Anything else? The looking at
Selective focus.
selective focus, a little bit. This is a lot of depth of field going on in this one. This one has definitely limited depth of field. He's got the background out of focus, a little bokeh in the foreground. Look at the light. Look at the directional lighting. That's what Peter Hurley also has common. When he shoots, he likes a directional lighting. He likes to put a softbox off to the side or a beauty dish. So we got that light from this one's coming in from an open window. Light over here is from a strobe. So it's a strobe lighting coming in here, coming from the side. He told us that he had a studio with a really nice window in it, a great light-facing window. So he got used to directional available light is what he started to learn his lighting with. Then he started to get more strobes and figure out strobes a little bit.
This one's unreal because he's got the sun in the back, the light's coming from the left. So
Yeah, well, yeah, this is a mixture of artificial, right? It's strobe and artificial. But he's a pro photographer. He's got to be diverse, so he's got all that down. Okay, John Paul Caponegro. John Paul Caponegro is, he's a guy that influenced me in his writing and his observations on art. And I absolutely want you to go to his website because he's got interviews with a lot of artists he's been conducting over the past 20 years. I think it's really amazing stuff. Has anyone checked my Facebook the past couple of days? My Facebook friends with anyone here? No? Yeah. Did you see the JP? It was amazing. I got lost in that and started reading it. So John Paul Caponegro, the thing about him is that he comes from a family of artists. That's one thing that he's got a pretty famous father, Paul Caponegro, and his mother is also a painter and an artist as well. So that's really important for him to understand his work. He's also he's very well educated in art, so he's got this great understanding of the way that art works. So growing up in that artist family, Paul Caponegro is his dad, and Paul Caponegro probably top 10 or top 50 living photographers. Paul Caponegro's in there. He's a great, there's a big body of work he did on Stonehenge. He's got multiple books. He's very collected. He's a wonderful photographer. And having Paul Caponegro as your dad would be a big influence for you. So to go back to that style, your upbringing, you know, living with a bunch of artists is pretty incredible. Ed Brommer, my father was a salesman at Sears for 43 years. So I learned how to sell things, you know. John Paul Caponegro learned photography from his dad.
Yale graduate.
Yale graduate, the Yale School, is that? Little Walker Evans going on there. So his work, he likes to work with a limited color palette. He likes that one color to permeate through all of his pieces. He likes wide open spaces. Now, John Paul had an unfortunate catastrophe in his life. He lost his young wife at a very early age, and it really affected, I think it affected him greatly. And I look at his work, what he created earlier and what he created after, and I see a difference in that. So that's the emotions and what's going on. This is an early piece, and these are some later pieces. His work became very spiritual as he worked out the tremendous loss that he had. And I think when it also brought a simplicity to his work. He started to make his work less complex, and he started looking at open spaces a lot more, and the dialogue, that open spaces, and the etherealness of the photograph afterwards. So that goes back to your upbringing, it goes back to your attitudes and your emotions, and I think he's working out this quite a bit. He is a photographer that has a lot of influence going on, so that was important for him. But what I would say that if I could learn anything from his loss, it's that he takes a loss, he works it out with his photography, and he regurgitates it into something that's consistent with his style. So any one of us, when we have something tremendous in our lives that happens, we lose somebody or we get into an accident, I think it's important is not to focus on the negative aspect of what happened to you, but understand how you can take that negativity and let it fuel your art in some way and let it lead you into a direction. I got into a terrible accident in 2006, and I was complaining to a guy that worked here, Mike Siciliano, who's a Vietnam vet and a real character, and Mike goes, stop whining. Let it take you somewhere that you hadn't gone before. And while I was recuperating, I couldn't work with heavy cameras, so I started to work with a tripod more that I could set up the camera and play with it. So try to embrace anything that happens that's awful. John Paul also started going to Antarctica recently in the past couple of years, and he's been going back and forth, and he loves Antarctica. He's got a large body of work on Antarctica. He's also got a published book on the Antarctica. And I recently was photographing in Alaska. I was photographing on very cloudy days, glaciers, especially glaciers that had crumbled and had these big floating bergs. And it wasn't quite Antarctica, but looking at this image the entire time that I was looking at the beautiful colors of icebergs, I really was thinking John Paul Caponegro. And I was a bit challenged in trying to use the composition of this photograph and let it transfer. I have to say that I didn't come anywhere near a shot as good as John Paul Caponegro's work is. But he's been working on this body of work in Antarctica for quite some time. Some really good stuff. Okay, let me introduce you to the psycho that I live with, Barbara Brummer. So, now we love Barbara. Right, Gabe? She's a good woman. She's cool. Barbara is Italian-born, which means that she's got lots of style in her very blood and DNA. And Barbara's work is a little bit on the dark side, but only on the surface, okay? It's really not. What she wants to do with her Trail of Blood series is that she wants to take objects and she wants to show them living. And if you're living, you have blood inside of you. But if you're wounded, you also can bleed. But what she doesn't want to show is that these aren't wounds. These are blood, and she's imbibing life into them. She's probably going to watch the video for this and scream at me that I got it wrong, but she should have provided me an artist statement this morning. In any case, she takes this work and she matches it very closely to titles. So Prom Queen, we got the tiara, which she was amazed at the tiara in America. Eve, she had to work with an apple, and she was trained in a school in Milan called the Scuola Politecnica. And the Scuola Politecnica is an actual Bauhaus school where we don't have really so many Bauhaus schools here in America, but it was in Milan, so it kind of worked out. And Bauhaus was industrial design and some revolutionary art movement that happened where they wanted to really be very conscious of the shapes and the forms, and also there was a utilitarian aspect to any art that was created usually within the Bauhaus. So she kind of would take those objects. This was one, this is called The Butcher of 30th Street. She just recently put that into a frame. And she takes still lifes and she photographs them. So she's creating a sculptured object for her photograph. So the phone she actually scored on eBay for like $10 because she wanted the old dial-up phone, which we didn't have anymore. I haven't had a landline since '97. So she took that. This was courtesy call. Again, the phone is bleeding. The Butcher of 30th Street. These were hands. You guys know the store on Broadway called Fish's Eddy? You guys ever see the hands in Fish's Eddy? They've had them, the porcelain hands from a glove factory. It was a vinyl glove. So she bought a bunch of them and suspended them and dipped them in blood. It is stage blood. She doesn't use real blood, so fortunately. This is called Heavy Metal, and she just recently completed this one. Heavy Metal, this is her grandfather's trumpet that is an object that's laying around the Tuscany house, and she took it on a white background. Notice she lives with me, she works with that white background. And she made it bleed. And it's cool because there's a relationship. It's her grandfather's trumpet. And she managed to put it into a photograph, and she took the frame, she bought the frame, she customized the frame, she painted it. She knew the frame and the brass would work together. Notice on this one, she used a complementary blue color to get the coolness of the photograph. So she really put this stuff together. I don't have any more of her framework. Okay, here's the two. She schlepped this one back from Italy, and it was a frame that was made of some kind of like a masonite. It had cracked. She rebuilt it. She spray painted it. Actually, I spray painted. I'm a better spray painter than her. I come from owning hot rods of primer gray. Anyway, so then she paints it red to match it. This one was her first piece, and she rebuilt the frame, and she just kind of with the white, the red, it worked. But then you can see how she got a little bit more elaborate with some of the other ones like that, and especially the Butcher of 30th Street. Okay, Ellen Carey. Ellen Carey came here last year with the F295 Symposium. Now, Ellen Carey's work is pretty unique stuff. She's also an instructor in Massachusetts, and she's a highly collected photographer. I first saw her work in the Aperture Gallery, had a work on abstract, and she's known for her abstract photography. So she worked with light painting early on. That was how she explored photography to begin with. She worked with light painting. She was a big fan of Man Ray, and you may recognize some of the Man Ray-esseness of her in a way. It kind of, she's actually a historian of Man Ray. And then she kind of started working with playing with colors, and her style started to just follow this pathway, and you could really see it. This 80s work, which has a sort of geometric look of the 80s, and it definitely kind of works out a certain way. The light painting led to painting subjects with colored lights. She started working into repetitions, and then she started to strip down her photography, get away from light painting, and just experiment with abstract photography, working with colors. And then she started working with Polaroid cameras, and when you would pull the Polaroid out, there's something called a bloom. A bloom is the chemistry that kind of gets splooged out of the back of a Polaroid. You guys ever play with Polaroid cameras? That's called the bloom. She invented and claimed a shape based off it. So she would she would photograph a colored wall, but then she would specifically play with the bloom and extend it out and do a transfer. And this was all work that she really kind of pioneered. And it's definitely indicative of her style, and it certainly plays out to abstract photography, which she's known for abstract photography. Google abstract photography and abstract photographers, and Ellen Carey's name will certainly come up. She got a paying gig. She photographed Hall & Oates in the 80s. The record company had seen her work, but she was getting it out there, her light painting work, and she made the most amount of money on any photography with this. So what did she do? Is she took her style, her light painting, her stylized style of light painting. Gabe Biederman's in the audience there. Gabe does a little bit of light painting. And Gabe, you ever try to do like a shape like that or something paint like that?
It's pretty tricky, especially with the Dr. Colors.
Exactly, it's tricky stuff. So in collage, and what she did is she got good at her craft. She got really good at light painting and figured it out, and worked it out. She's very happy with this body of work. Okay, so speaking of this one, I've been hinting at this one for a while. Control what goes public. One of the most important things for you to get an identifiable style is to not let people see the stuff that doesn't quite matter to you, or your experimental work, or your trial and basis stuff. So it's your choice what work gets seen. It's your choice what you put on your Facebook. It's your choice what you go show when you get a gallery show. It's your choice what you decide to make a book with. So that being said, Neil, you mentioned before about shooting different work. What about the tertiary and the secondary work and experimenting? And I think that you should work with different bodies of work, different techniques, but you should only show very specific work. It will help you get recognized for that style. So control what you put onto your blog, what goes onto your Facebook, what goes onto your Flickr page. Don't put willy-nilly all different stuff all over the place. Try to choose things with the same focal length. Try to choose things that are all black and white or all color or all light painting. Try to choose that kind of stuff. Now you can feature one particular primary work and you can have the other work out there. The way that you can do that is with a website dedicated to travel photography. What's your name?
Annie.
Annie, right? Annie's Adventures, and that's going to be your travel photography. But then Annie really likes portraits, and she's going to focus on portrait work. So anniesportraits.com could be one website. Annie's Adventures can be another one. You could almost play with being anonymous with a body of work just to get it out there. So maybe do a Flickr under an anonymous and see if you get comments on it and build up something a little weird. Even if it falls out of your shooting style, keep shooting to stay sharp. Keep embracing the new technology that's out there and find ways to leverage that technology towards getting better style or more definable style. But keep the work. Keep work that doesn't fit in your genre close to you so you can learn it. Again, a good observation that I'm here at B&H, I got to play with different cameras. I mean, even Gabe, did you play with the Leica X1 this weekend? Slow focusing. Slow. Cut that part out. No, I can't.
Is that a $2,000 camera?
Only 2,000. You have to pay that much money to be privileged. It makes you slow your work down so you create better photographs. But anyway, no, but you know, I was shooting things that I normally wouldn't shoot just to learn about the focusing and the way the camera worked. I'm not going to show that work off, but stay sharp. Keep shooting, keep at it. Always make photographs. You got to keep moving forward to know where you've been and to understand where you've been in the past. That's really important stuff. So this is a big one, and I quote Roger Waters from Pink Floyd on this one, where I got a little black book that I keep me poems in it. Who here maintains a little black book? One person, two people, three, four. Okay, only 4 of you guys do. Good job. Why the little black book is so important? I didn't bring my little black book, but my little black book is important because
All the time.
perfect, beautiful.
There's nothing good in it.
You hear things. You hear certain things. You see certain artists. Like, I gave you guys a cheat sheet and you were writing down some stuff. But what if you notice a great photographer? Like, I didn't write down, how did you guys wrote down Maurizio Catalan for the Guggenheim show. If you have a little black book, you can write that in there. But the little black book is very important because it keeps you organized when you're working. So I like to do my project plans. It starts off in the beginning of the book, and as I get towards the end of the book, the thing is filled up with all these plans and all these ideas, and I get ideas back and forth. When I was in Paris last, I went to a show. It was a pre-Raphaelites in photography. I love the pre-Raphaelites. I idolize them. I think they're awesome. And I had no idea that the pre-Raphaelites manifested in photography as well. I thought the pre-Raphaelite photography was but I thought that the words and some of the things that they were saying was really important. I didn't know Lewis Carroll was a photographer, and I didn't know Lewis Carroll's real name was not Lewis Carroll. I wrote his name down, but I don't remember it offhand. But it's not his real name, and he partook of photography, and he would try to work some of his stories and his photography. Really cool stuff. So having the little black book is something you can jot these ideas down. It's really important. So what I recommend for everybody is go to a bookstore, and the Moleskine books, those are the primary little black books. And they even got a little pocket in the back so you can put little tickets or little items or little paper items in the back of it so you can keep them as mementos to remind you of things. The little black book will help you keep a roadmap to your style. If you go somewhere and you take a map and you follow the directions and you go there, then you crinkle up the map and you throw it away, and then 3 years later you need to go somewhere again, do you print out the instructions again? You kind of have to. You kind of go by memory, but it's hard to remember the roads and the twists and turns. If you got a little black book, it's really cool. In about 10 years, you go back to your little black book and you see all this information and all these things that lead you on your way. So I think that's really important, maintain your little black book. So we're nearing the end. Let's go into summary. What are you going to do? You're going to stick with your genre. You're not going to show what's outside of your genre. You're not going to build portfolios and go to portfolio reviews with stuff that's way outside your genre. You're going to stick to it. I want you to consider bodies of work and related projects. If there's one lesson that I go over here in the event space and all the other lecturers do, it is work into bodies of work. Great photographers in the back. He's going to be talking later on, Gabe Biederman. I helped out Gabe and I got to hang a show with Gabe. I didn't get to curate the show with Gabe, but as I was hanging things, I was thinking curatorial. And I realized something. This was a couple of years ago. Gabe was pretty much all over the place. He's a great photographer, but his work that he was showing was different frames, different periods of time, different work, night photography, landscapes. They were kind of all over. And when we were talking about it, it's, you know what, Gabe, this night stuff is really strong. I think you should pursue the night stuff heavier. Gabe, for the past couple of years, has really been focusing on the night. And I think it's really helped you evolve in terms of that style. So that's pretty important stuff. Experiment and keep shooting. Did you guys like what I had to say about a point-and-shoot digital camera? Okay, everyone should have a point-and-shoot digital camera, preferably they can shoot RAW. And why they should have it is that the best camera is the camera that's with you. So you should always have that nice high-end small camera. And there's something to be said about a good quality small camera. I'm not asking you to spend $2,000 on the Leica X1. I'm asking you to spend around about $479 on the Nikon, or the Canon, I think, is around $450. So just right around that $500 price range gets you a good one. And you'll always have that camera with you, and you'll always be shooting. And you can play with the picture style modes and set up custom picture styles so that everything you take with that camera has a very specific look. And you'll start to see a trend in your style coming out. Big one, engage in community, seek mentors. Okay, community. Has anyone been down to the Soho Photo Club down in, they're actually in Tribeca now. White Street. Soho Photo is a great community. There's camera clubs that are around. There's the Park West Camera Club. Every camera club or every group will have its own personality and a clique of people that go there. You should go and check it out and see if you can jive with these people, if you like the work that they're producing, and then engage with them. Camera Club of New York, which is on 38th Street. Camera Club of New York right now has a very young, vibrant, very Yale-esque type Walter Evans type work going on, but they are a very cool group, and they have the Camera Club of New York openings. Go to their website, get on their mailing list. They have great openings. Their gallery space is about the third of the size of this room, but it's a really cool scene that's going on there. Another one for community is we have the event space here has what's called the Infinity Photographic Society. Every 2 months, we give a topic, and you have to come and submit 3 photographs to the topic, and we do a slideshow, and you talk about the topic. It's not a competition. I don't sit there and go, well, the composition over on the left-hand side is extending far into the third quarter of the image. And we don't do that. We just show images. If we like them, we give them thumbs up and we talk about them. If they're really bad, we don't really criticize you so much. You should just know that you need to kick it up a couple of notches just to kind of get on the same par as the other work that's out there, or just come in and hang out and take a look at it. We have January 2nd or January 3rd is our next meeting, and the theme is, in concurrence with the calendar year of 2012, is the end of the world. So you can go online, we have it listed. Just fast forward to January, you'll see it. Seek mentors. Mentors are really important. Sean Kernan's a mentor of mine. Work with go to the main workshops and take a class there, and you'll instantly find mentors all over the place. Mark Palmer, there's a guy, you don't have an English accent? Wait, no, okay. Well, seek out people of English accents so that they can give you pieces of advice. No, but find mentors. It's really important. There's a couple of people here at the event space that over the years I've been a shadowy mentor for. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and it's a good thing. My big one was Oreste Dell'Amico, an Italian, was a big mentor of mine. Throw fear out the door, and what does Devo say? Crack that whip. Okay, so don't worry about it. Don't fear. Don't worry your pictures aren't perfect. Don't worry if you don't sell pictures. Don't worry if people don't like your work. It's in here. Go for it yourself. Keep up that notebook. That's really important. The little black book. Trust me on this one. It's a good blueprint for what you're doing. Work on that. Okay, are you getting your work out there? I want you to go to Google, and I want you to type your name into Google. And what you'll do is you'll see what's going on. So, good. Number 1, Seattle Suspects comes up. A book that I worked on, low price, great. Who is David Brommer? And then there's some weatherman, Department of Geography, there's a weatherman out there. I'm up against this David Brommer. I don't know who he is, but damn it, my Google rankings are better than him, and you gotta stay on it. A cool one to do is, you can do the Google thing, it'll show all the hyperlinks, but click up on top where it says images, and then you'll see all the pictures that you put out there where your copyright's on it and what's actually out there. And you will also quickly learn that there is no safe way that you can control all your images that are out there. Once you digitize it and you put it on Facebook or Flickr, it'd be out there. I'll play around with that one. Okay, what's next? Finding photographic style, the critique session. Pay no attention to that bit.ly, that's an old one. But what we're gonna do is, I have an assignment for you guys. On December 29th, I want you to come back from 3 to 5. We'll be here at around 2:15, 2 o'clock, and I want you to come with 5 images on a jump drive. And what I want you to do with these 5 images on the jump drive is we're going to drop them into a folder, and we're going to go over them. Now, the criteria for this is that you should go into your archive and look at these images and choose your 5 favorite images that kind of go in the direction of the style that you want. This critique session won't be an open critique. It'll be a very specific critique session. The critique session will be based upon the anatomy of photographic style. So we're going to talk about if your 5 pictures do relate to each other and how, if they do consistent genres, if they have messages and treatments. Now, a big one here that I've done a couple of these critique sessions and people love it is that if you've got 2 bodies of work and you're not sure which body of work you want to go for, come and make those 2 bodies of work into your 5 pictures and show them. And you'll get a nice reaction from the group on what they feel is strongest and what you maybe should pursue and go a little bit deeper into. So it's a critique session with a little bit of feedback. I moderate it, but all of you guys are part of the critique session. Now, one thing, will the critique session be brutal? Okay, if you're here, I'm going to assume that you can focus your camera and you can get good exposures. That being said, if you have out of focus pictures that don't look good in out of focus, they're soft, you've broken some rules that just don't make any sense, if there's a lack of craft going on here, I'm simply going to say you need to keep shooting more. You need to work on your base technique. In other words, what's the base technique? Making sure that you know how to work your autofocus and you can get good exposures. That's like, you got to have that down. Okay, so I have the links up there, and I want to thank everyone for coming to Finding Photographic Style. Thank you very much.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.